I find it fascinating that someone with your unusual background would presume to lecture us on neural innovation, Gregory Winters said, his voice carrying across the hotel conference room. His smile never reached his eyes as he looked directly at Dr. Alexander Bishop. Perhaps you could clarify where exactly you acquired your expertise. Surely not from the same institutions as the rest of us. The room fell silent. 200 of the medical industry's brightest minds and deepest pockets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The annual MedTech Summit had never witnessed such a blatant challenge during a keynote Q&A. Dr. Alexander Bishop stood at the podium, his 6'2" frame straight and still. His dark eyes met Winters' pale blue ones without flinching. The projector illuminated his face, highlighting cheekbones that hadn't lost their definition at 45 and a jawline that remained set despite the provocation. "That's an interesting question, Mr. Winters." Bishop replied, his baritone voice steady. "My background includes double Harvard degrees in neurosurgery and biomedical engineering, 12 years as a practicing neurosurgeon, and 7 patents in neural interface technology. But perhaps the unusual aspect you're referring to is something else entirely." A few uncomfortable coughs punctuated the silence. Everyone understood what Winters meant. In a room where Alexander Bishop was one of only 3 black executives present, the implication wasn't subtle. Winters adjusted his Italian silk tie. "I merely wondered if your rapid rise might have benefited from certain diversity initiatives. Merit should always be the deciding factor in our industry. Wouldn't you agree?" Bishop's company Mindframe Medical Technologies had just announced breakthrough results in neural implant trials. Their technology helped trauma patients regain motor function with unprecedented success rates. The medical community was buzzing, investors were circling, and Gregory Winters, executive VP at rival company NeuroSync, was clearly threatened. "Merit is indeed critical," Mr. Winters Bishop replied, each word measured and precise, "which is why our clinical trials were double-blind and peer-reviewed by the same institutions that educated both of us. The data speaks for itself." He gestured to the screen behind him where patient recovery metrics showed remarkable improvement compared to existing treatments. From the third row, Elena Rodriguez Bishop's chief operations officer caught his eye. Her subtle nod conveyed both support and warning. The Hispanic executive had worked with Bishop for 7 years and recognized when he was containing his true response. Bishop continued his presentation without missing a beat, but the damage was done. The whispers had started, the sidelong glances, the doubt that Winters had so deliberately planted. As Bishop concluded his talk, the applause was polite but reserved. Several investors who had approached him enthusiastically before the presentation now held back, suddenly hesitant. Thomas Kelly, silver-haired founder of Kelly Medical Investments, who controlled funding that could make or break startups, watched the interaction with keen interest. His weathered face revealed nothing, but his attention never left Bishop as the doctor gathered his materials. "Excellent presentation despite the interruption," a female voice said as Bishop stepped away from the podium. He turned to find a woman with copper-colored hair in a tailored charcoal suit. "Sophia Bennett, Meridian Airlines," she said, extending her hand. "Your work could have applications for pilot recovery programs. I'd like to discuss it further if you're attending the dinner tonight." Bishop shook her hand. "I appreciate your interest, Ms. Bennett." As she walked away, Bishop could hear Winters already gathering a crowd around himself on the other side of the room. "Remarkable claims require remarkable evidence," Winters was saying. "And I've seen too many flashy startups promise neural miracles before." Bishop packed up his presentation materials, his face betraying none of the fury and humiliation burning inside him. This wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But each time cut just as deep as the first. "Need me to accidentally spill coffee on his Italian loafers?" Elena Rodriguez appeared at his side, her expression deadly serious despite the joke. Bishop's mouth quirked up slightly. "Tempting, but his shoes didn't question my credentials." "No, just the man wearing them," Elena replied. Want me to pull up the Stanford case study on mind frame for Kelly? He was watching the whole exchange. Let the work speak for itself, Bishop said, closing his laptop. We have the dinner tonight. Plenty of time to undo the damage. But as he walked out of the conference room, Bishop felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The constant need to be flawless. The knowledge that one misstep would confirm biases already held against him. The exhaustion of navigating spaces where his presence alone made others uncomfortable. And Gregory Winters had just made his job infinitely harder. If you've ever faced unfair questioning of your abilities despite your qualifications, drop a comment below. Your stories remind us we're not alone in these struggles. Alexander Bishop hadn't begun his professional life intending to become a CEO. His journey started in South Chicago, where his mother worked double shifts as a nurse to support him and his younger sister after their father died. The medical books she brought home captivated young Alexander, who would pore over anatomy diagrams while other kids played video games. His academic brilliance earned him scholarships first to Phillips Academy, then to Harvard for undergraduate studies. But instead of proceeding directly to medical school, Bishop made a decision that confused his mentors. He enlisted in the Air Force. I want to serve before I lead, he told his concerned mother. And I want to understand what it means to put your life in someone else's hands before I ask patients to put their lives in mine. His aptitude tests revealed exceptional spatial reasoning and stress management capabilities. The Air Force recognized his potential immediately and selected him for fighter pilot training. Bishop excelled, eventually flying F-16s in combat missions over Afghanistan. His call sign steady reflected both his flying style and temperament. After completing his service with honors, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, Bishop returned to his original path. Harvard Medical School accepted him, where he specialized in neurosurgery, fascinated by the brain's capacity to control movement. During his residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, he treated wounded veterans with traumatic brain injuries, which inspired his interest in neural implant technology. The idea for MindFrame came during his final year of residency when he witnessed a patient's frustration at being unable to control his hand movements after a stroke. The pathway is broken, not the intent Bishop had explained to the patient's family. We need technology that can rebuild those pathways. He founded MindFrame Medical Technologies 7 years ago with Elena Rodriguez, whom he'd met when she was managing operations for a medical device company. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, Elena had fought her own battles to be taken seriously in the corporate world. Her operational brilliance complemented Bishop's medical expertise and vision. You dream it. I'll build it, she had told him during their first meeting. Her ability to transform complex ideas into executable plans had proven invaluable as MindFrame grew from 2 people in a small office to a company of 120 employees on the verge of a major breakthrough. Gregory Winters represented everything Bishop had encountered throughout his career. Winters had inherited his position at NeuroSync through family connections. His father had been on the board and had spent 20 years rising through management despite limited technical knowledge. His company had dominated the neural interface market with incremental improvements to existing technology while dismissing more innovative approaches as unproven. What made Winters dangerous wasn't just his prejudice, but his influence. As executive VP of sales at the industry's largest player, his opinions shaped market perception. His dismissal of Bishop's work could frighten off investors at a crucial stage in MindFrame's development. Thomas Kelly was one such potential investor. The venture capitalist had made his fortune identifying medical breakthroughs before they hit mainstream awareness. At 67, he had the freedom to make decisions based on innovation rather than quarterly projections. His funding had launched several successful medical startups, and his interest in MindFrame had been a source of hope for Bishop and Elena. Before Winters' public challenge, Kelly had scheduled a private meeting with Bishop for the following day. Now that meeting's outcome seemed far less certain. Sophia Bennett represented another type of opportunity. As CEO of Meridian Airlines, she controlled a company with both the resources and need for neural recovery technology. Pilots who suffered strokes or traumatic injuries often lost their careers along with their motor functions. Mindframe's technology could potentially change that equation. We need Kelly or Bennett. Elena had said during their preparation for the conference. Preferably both. Kelly for the funding credibility, Bennett for the high-profile industrial application. Now, Bishop was preparing for a dinner where he would face Winters again, with both Kelly and Bennett present. The stakes couldn't be higher for Mindframe, or for the patients who could benefit from their technology. In his hotel room, Bishop removed his jacket and loosened his tie. On the dresser sat a small photograph in a worn frame, Bishop in his Air Force flight suit standing beside an F-16 helmet tucked under his arm. Next to it was a more recent photo of him with Diana, his wife of 15 years, and their teenage twins, Adam and Alicia. Diana had been his navigator through both military and medical worlds. A corporate attorney who understood power dynamics intimately, she had helped him anticipate and counter the Gregorys of the world. They expect anger, she would remind him. Give them dignity instead. It confuses them. Bishop picked up his phone and dialed. "How'd it go?" Diana asked immediately. Winters took a shot. Public or private, very public, during the Q&A. Diana was silent for a moment. "How bad?" questioned my credentials. Implied I'm a diversity token. In those words, close enough that everyone understood. Diana sighed. Who was watching Everyone Who Matters? Kelly. Some new prospect from Meridian Airlines. You maintained composure. Of course. Good. Her voice softened. I'm sorry, Alexander. One day they'll run out of ways to test you. Bishop smiled despite himself. That day seems perpetually on the horizon, yet you keep walking toward it. Her tone shifted to practical. What's next? Dinner in an hour. Winters will be there. Then you'll be brilliant as always. Not despite him, but because that's who you are. After hanging up, Bishop showered and changed into a fresh suit. As he adjusted his tie, he studied his reflection. The face that looked back was composed, dignified, resolved. It was the face he had cultivated through years of being the only black student, the only black pilot, the only black neurosurgeon, the only black CEO in countless rooms. It was armor carefully maintained and absolutely necessary, and tonight he would need it more than ever. The hotel elevator descended smoothly from Bishop's floor to the mezzanine level. He used these moments alone to center himself a ritual from his flying days. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 7. Exhale for 8. Clear the mind for the mission ahead. When the doors opened, he found Elena waiting elegant in a burgundy dress, her tablet in hand as always. I've been researching who else is at our table, she said without preamble, falling into step beside him. Bennett requested to be seated with us, which is promising, and Winters had table with Kelly and the conference organizers. Bishop nodded. Have our clinical results ready to send to anyone who asks. The actual data, not just the summary. Already preloaded. Elena's efficiency was one of her greatest strengths. I've also compiled the patient testimonials in case anyone questions the human impact. As they approached the ballroom entrance, Bishop noticed several attendees glancing his way, then quickly averting their eyes. News of the confrontation had clearly spread. Dr. Bishop. A balding man in an ill-fitting suit stepped into their path. Harold Weiss, Boston Medical Journal. Care to comment on concerns raised about Mindframe's clinical methodology? Bishop maintained his neutral expression. Our methodology adheres to FDA protocols and has been independently verified. The results published in your journal last month speak for themselves, and responses to suggestions that diversity initiatives may have accelerated your company's prominence. Bishop felt Elena tense beside him, but he kept his voice steady. I welcome anyone to examine our patient outcomes compared to industry standards. Merit in medical innovation is ultimately measured in lives improved. With a polite nod, he guided Elena past the reporter. Vultures circling already, she muttered. Winters works fast, Bishop replied quietly. But so do we. Inside the ballroom, round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each centered with elaborate floral arrangements. Name cards guided the seating arrangement, and as Elena had reported, Bishop found himself at a table near the center of the room, not the place of honor, but not relegated to the periphery either. Sophia Bennett was already seated, engaged in conversation with an older physician Bishop recognized as Dr. Lawrence Friedman, a respected neurologist. She looked up as Bishop approached her, expression warm but evaluating. "Dr. Bishop, please join us," she said. Dr. Friedman was just sharing his thoughts on neuroplasticity and aviation medicine. Bishop shook hands with Friedman, who seemed genuinely pleased to meet him. "Your presentation was fascinating," the older doctor said. "I've been following Mindframe's work since your initial research paper 3 years ago." "That's kind of you to say," Bishop replied, sensing an ally. As they took their seats, Bishop noted the strategic arrangement of the room. From his position, he could see Gregory Winters holding court at the head table, Thomas Kelly beside him. Winters was leaning in, speaking animatedly, while Kelly listened, his expression unreadable. Elena noticed his gaze. "Focus on who's in front of you, not who isn't," she whispered. Their table filled with 2 more doctors and a representative from a medical supply company. The conversations flowed professionally, but Bishop noted the subtle undercurrent, occasional glances toward the head table, slightly guarded responses when he spoke. The shadow Winters had cast was present even here. During the salad course, Sophia Bennett turned to him directly. "Tell me, Dr. Bishop, what led you from medicine to entrepreneurship?" It's not a common path. The question was innocent enough, but in the current atmosphere it carried weight. Was she too questioning his qualifications? "I witnessed too many patients with motor function loss who were told their condition was permanent," Bishop replied. Technology existed to help them, but it wasn't being developed because the market was considered too small. I decided to change that equation. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. At Meridian, we face similar challenges with injured pilots. The industry tends to discard experienced professionals after physical trauma, losing decades of expertise because of mobility issues. "Precisely the problem we're addressing," Bishop said, recognizing the opening. "Our neural interfaces don't just improve function. They restore confidence and identity, and your military background gives you particular insight, I imagine," Bennett asked. Bishop paused, surprised. Few people at the conference knew of his Air Force service. It wasn't something he typically highlighted in medical circles. "I do have some military experience," he acknowledged carefully. "Distinguished Flying Cross recipients usually do," Bennett replied with a slight smile. "My father served in the Air Force. He keeps track of notable pilots." The revelation shifted something in the atmosphere. Dr. Friedman leaned forward with new interest. "You were a military pilot before becoming a neurosurgeon." F-16s, Bishop confirmed. "The experience taught me much about precision and performance under pressure." Elena smoothly added, "Dr. Bishop's unusual career path is precisely what gives Mindframe its unique perspective. We approach neural interfacing from both medical and practical application standpoints." As the main course arrived, Bishop found the conversation flowing more naturally. Bennett asked specific questions about Mindframe's technology, while Friedman offered insights from his clinical experience with similar patients. The earlier tension began to dissipate, until Gregory Winters' laugh cut through the room, loud and deliberate. "Well, Thomas, in this industry we have to distinguish between genuine innovation and clever marketing. Some newer companies excel far more at the latter than the former." Though Winters hadn't looked their way, the message was clear. Bishop continued his conversation without acknowledging the interruption, but he felt the table's energy shift again. Speaking of distinguishing, Bennett said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard at nearby tables. Meridian Airlines is always looking for genuine innovation. We find it's usually developed by those who've actually faced the challenges they're solving, not merely theorized about them. Bishop caught her gaze. A subtle alliance had formed, unexpected but welcome. As dessert was served, Bishop noticed Thomas Kelly rise from the head table and begin making his way around the room, stopping briefly at various tables. The veteran investor was known for his unconventional approach to networking, preferring to observe potential partners in different social contexts before making decisions. "Kelly, at 2:00, Elena murmured. Bishop continued his conversation with Dr. Friedman, aware but not overtly watching as Kelly moved closer to their table. When the investor finally arrived, he placed a hand on the back of an empty chair. "May I join you briefly, Doctor?" Bishop Kelly asked, his voice gravelly from decades of strong opinions strongly expressed. "Of course, Mr. Kelly," Bishop replied, gesturing to the seat. "We were just discussing neural pathway regeneration in traumatic injury cases." Kelly settled into the chair with the deliberate movements of a man conserving energy. His shrewd eyes moved around the table, acknowledging each person before returning to Bishop. "Interesting exchange during your presentation earlier," Kelly said without preamble. "Winters seems concerned about your company's foundations." The table fell silent. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Bishop expected. "Mr. Winters is entitled to his perspective," Bishop replied evenly. "In medicine, however, we ultimately defer to results. Our neural interface technology is showing a 78% improvement in motor function recovery compared to current standards." "Numbers can be interpreted many ways," Kelly observed, though his tone remained neutral. "True," Bishop acknowledged. "Which is why we've submitted our raw data to 3 independent review boards. All confirmed our findings." Kelly's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's unusual at this stage." "We anticipated scrutiny," Bishop said, holding the investor's gaze. "Breakthrough technology often faces exceptional skepticism, particularly when it comes from unexpected sources." A small smile crossed Kelly's face. "Indeed it does." He glanced at Bennett. "Sophia, I didn't realize you had an interest in neural technology. Meridian has several former pilots who could benefit from Dr. Bishop's work," she replied smoothly. "And we're always exploring innovative safety solutions." Kelly nodded thoughtfully, then returned his attention to Bishop. "Our meeting tomorrow still stands, Doctor. I look forward to a more detailed discussion." As Kelly moved to the next table, Elena exhaled softly. That went better than expected. Before Bishop could respond, the evening's host approached the microphone on the small stage at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that the National Weather Service has just issued a hurricane warning for the entire region. The storm has accelerated unexpectedly and will make landfall tomorrow afternoon. We strongly advise all conference attendees to arrange early departures if possible." The announcement sent a ripple of concern through the room. Phones emerged as people began checking flights and weather reports. "This complicates things," Elena said, already scrolling through her phone. "Last flights out are tomorrow morning and they'll be overbooked immediately." Bishop nodded, watching as across the room Gregory Winters was already on his phone, likely securing his exit strategy. Thomas Kelly was doing the same, which meant their crucial meeting might never happen. Sophia Bennett stood gathering her things. "If you'll excuse me, I need to contact my pilot. Dr. Bishop, I hope we can continue our conversation soon." As the dinner broke up amid growing concerns about the approaching storm, Bishop felt the opportunity he'd been building toward slipping away. The damage Winters had done might not be repairable if everyone scattered before Bishop could reestablish his credibility. Outside the ballroom windows, the night sky flickered with distant lightning. The storm was coming literally and figuratively, and Bishop needed to prepare for both. If you've ever had to navigate a high-stakes professional situation while facing unfair scrutiny, hit that like button. We understand the pressure of performing flawlessly when others are waiting for you to fail. The banquet room transformed within minutes. The formal dinner atmosphere dissolved into a chaotic planning session as attendees huddled in groups, phones pressed to ears, urgently rebooking flights and accommodations. Hotel staff circulated with printed weather advisories, their practiced hospitality strained by the unexpected crisis. Bishop and Elena retreated to a quiet corner to assess their options. Last commercial flight to Chicago leaves at 8:35 tomorrow morning. Elena reported, fingers moving rapidly over her tablet. I've booked us both seats, but it's already showing nearly full. Bishop nodded. What about Kelly? His assistant says he'll try to honor the meeting, but he's looking at private flight options. Nothing confirmed. And Bennett. Already left. Meridian has a corporate jet, so she's coordinating pilot schedules. Bishop frowned. The carefully orchestrated conference so crucial to Mindframe's next phase was disintegrating under the threat of the approaching hurricane. Years of research, clinical trials, and patient advocacy might amount to nothing if they couldn't secure either Kelly's investment or Bennett's industrial partnership. Across the room, Gregory Winters was surrounded by a circle of industry figures, his voice carrying through the anxious chatter. Absolutely, we'll maintain our distribution commitments through the weather disruption. NeuroSync's infrastructure was designed for continuity. The message was clear: established companies like NeuroSync offered stability, while newer ventures like Mindframe might falter under pressure. Another calculated move in Winters' campaign. We should approach Kelly now, Elena suggested, before he finalizes alternative arrangements. Bishop was about to agree when he noticed Thomas Kelly engaged in conversation with Dr. Friedman from their dinner table. The neurologist was gesturing enthusiastically, and Kelly was listening with unusual focus. Hold on, Bishop said. Let's see where that goes. As they watched, Friedman pointed in their direction, and Kelly's gaze shifted to Bishop. After a moment, the investor nodded to Friedman and began making his way toward them. Dr. Bishop, Kelly said as he approached. Dr. Friedman speaks very highly of your work. He believes your neural interface approach could be transformative for stroke recovery. Dr. Friedman has been following our research since the beginning, Bishop acknowledged. His clinical experience has been invaluable in refining our approach. Kelly glanced at his phone, then back at Bishop. My pilot advises we need to depart by 7 a.m. to avoid the worst of the weather. Could we move our meeting to 6 a.m. in the hotel lobby? Bishop didn't hesitate. Absolutely. We'll be prepared. Good. Dr. Friedman mentioned you have some additional patient outcome data. Elena immediately produced her tablet. We can send the complete dataset to your team right now, Mr. Kelly. The investor nodded appreciatively. Do that. I'll review it tonight. He glanced across the room where Winters was still holding court. And, Dr. Bishop, I form my own opinions based on evidence, not rhetoric. I look forward to our discussion. As Kelly moved away, Elena sent the files with a satisfied tap. That's promising. It's an opportunity, Bishop replied cautiously. Nothing more yet. The room had begun to empty as attendees departed to make travel arrangements. As Bishop and Elena prepared to leave, Sophia Bennett reappeared, now wearing a light raincoat over her dinner attire. Dr. Bishop. A moment she called, approaching quickly. I've just confirmed with my pilot. We're flying back to Chicago at 7:30 a.m. I have space if you and Ms. Rodriguez would prefer a direct flight, rather than dealing with commercial cancellations. The offer took Bishop by surprise. That's very generous, Ms. Bennett. Purely self-interest, she replied with a slight smile. I'd like to continue our conversation about potential applications for Meridian. The storm has compressed my timeline, but not my interest. Bishop glanced at Elena, who gave a subtle nod. We have a 6 a.m. meeting with Thomas Kelly here at the hotel, he explained. If we could join your flight afterward, that would be ideal. I can delay to 8 a.m. if necessary, Bennett offered. Just let my office know. Here's my direct number." She handed Bishop a business card with elegant embossing. Weather permitting, of course. As Bennett walked away, Elena raised an eyebrow. "Interesting development." "Indeed," Bishop agreed. "Let's prepare for the Kelly meeting. Everything else is secondary." They were about to leave when Gregory Winters intercepted them near the door, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional courtesy. "Dr. Bishop," he said smoothly, "I hope my questions earlier didn't cause offense. I merely believe in thorough due diligence." Bishop met his gaze steadily. "No offense taken, Mr. Winters. Scrutiny strengthens valid research." "Quite so." Winters smiled without warmth. "I understand Kelly is considering involvement with Mindframe. He's brilliant, but sometimes idealistic about market realities." "We find idealism and innovation often go hand in hand," Bishop replied. Winters's smile tightened. "Innovation without market acceptance is just an expensive hobby, Dr. Bishop. NeuroSync has distribution channels in 47 countries. Perhaps we should discuss a strategic partnership instead of competing directly. Your technology under our infrastructure." The offer was both a threat and an attempt to assert dominance. Bishop recognized it instantly. Winters trying to position himself as the gatekeeper, the established power who could grant or deny access to the broader market. "An interesting proposition," Bishop replied neutrally. "We should certainly discuss options after our clinical trial results are published next month." Winters' expression flickered. He hadn't known the publication was imminent. "Of course. Though I should mention that our legal team has identified some potential IP overlap with your approach. Nothing concerning yet, but something to address before formal publication." Elena stiffened beside Bishop, but he maintained his composure. "Our patent portfolio is quite robust, Mr. Winters, but I'm sure our respective legal teams can communicate directly if you have specific concerns." Thunder rumbled outside closer now. The approaching storm provided a fitting backdrop to the tension between them. "Well," Winters said, finally, "safe travels in this weather." "Chicago, isn't it?" The casual mention of their destination confirmed Bishop's suspicion that Winters had been gathering information about their plans. "The same to you," Bishop replied simply. As Winters walked away, Elena muttered, "IP overlap." "Pure intimidation tactics," Expected Bishop said quietly. "He's running the standard playbook. First question the credentials, then the data, then threaten legal action. What's next? Questioning our manufacturing capacity." Bishop smiled slightly. "Give him until breakfast." They exited the banquet room into the hotel corridor, where attendees were still clustered in worried conversation about the approaching hurricane. The atmosphere had transformed from professional networking to collective concern. "We need to prepare for both Kelly and Bennett," Bishop said as they walked toward the elevators. "Kelly will want financial projections and scalability plans. Bennett will focus on specific applications for aviation medicine." Elena nodded, already making notes. "I'll update both presentations tonight and send them to you for review." In the elevator, Bishop checked his phone. Diana had texted weather looks bad. Airlines already canceling tomorrow afternoon flights. "Get out early," he texted back. "Working on it." Meeting Kelly at 6 a.m. Might have private flight option after. Her reply came instantly. "Good. Twins send love. Show them what you're made of." As the elevator doors opened on his floor, Bishop felt the competing pressures converging. Winters' machinations, the critical meetings with Kelly and Bennett, the approaching hurricane, and most importantly, the patients whose lives could be transformed by Mindframe's technology. Tomorrow would determine everything, and he needed to be ready. "Get some sleep," he told Elena as she continued up to her floor. "Tomorrow we either break through or we break." "We don't break," she replied firmly. "That's not in our company mission statement." Bishop smiled genuinely for the first time since Winters' public challenge. "No," he agreed. "It certainly is not." In his room, Bishop laid out his materials for the morning meeting and set multiple alarms. Outside his window, the wind had begun to intensify, bending the palm trees that lined the hotel property. The hurricane was accelerating just as the meteorologists had warned. He thought about the patients waiting for Mindframe's technology, the stroke survivors, the accident victims, the wounded veterans, people whose lives had been derailed by neurological damage who deserved a second chance. Whatever Winters might say or do, whatever obstacles the weather might create, those patients remained Bishop's true north. They were why he had founded Mindframe, why he had endured countless moments like today's public humiliation, why he would get up tomorrow and continue the fight. With that resolve firmly in mind, Bishop finally allowed himself to rest. The storm was coming, but he had flown through worse. The hotel lobby at 5:45 a.m. was a study in controlled chaos. Conference attendees clutched coffee cups and wheeled luggage, forming snaking lines at the reception desk where harried staff processed express checkouts. Outside the glass doors, shuttle vans idled in the circular drive windshield wipers, already battling the intensifying rain. Bishop arrived precisely on time, freshly showered and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. Elena appeared moments later looking equally prepared despite the early hour. Together, they secured a quiet corner of the lobby where Thomas Kelly was already waiting, reviewing documents on his tablet. Dr. Bishop, Ms. Rodriguez Kelly greeted them, standing with surprising energy for a man his age at such an early hour. "Appreciate your punctuality, especially given the circumstances. Thank you for maintaining our meeting," Mr. Kelly Bishop replied. "We understand how valuable your time is." For the next 45 minutes, Bishop and Elena presented Mindframe's technology, clinical results, and market strategy. Kelly listened attentively, asking pointed questions about manufacturing scalability, regulatory pathways, and patient selection criteria. The investor's experience showed in his queries. Each one targeted a potential weakness or overlooked opportunity. Bishop addressed each question directly, neither overselling nor understating Mindframe's position. Elena provided supporting data, smoothly anticipating documentation needs before Kelly requested them. As they concluded, Kelly sat back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Impressive technology, solid clinical foundation, he acknowledged. But Winters raised a concern yesterday that I'd be remiss not to address. Bishop nodded, prepared for this moment. Of course. NeuroSync has dominant market position and established distribution. They could either accelerate your entry or effectively block it. How do you plan to navigate that reality? We've developed relationships with 3 of the largest medical device distributors as alternatives to NeuroSync's channels, Bishop explained. More importantly, our technology addresses patient populations NeuroSync has historically underserved. We're not competing for their primary market. We're expanding the overall landscape. Kelly nodded thoughtfully. And the suggestion of intellectual property conflicts. A standard intimidation tactic, Elena interjected. We've conducted exhaustive prior art searches and freedom to operate analyses. Our patent counsel identifies no legitimate conflicts. Would you be open to NeuroSync acquiring Mindframe? Kelly asked bluntly. Bishop met his gaze steadily. At the right valuation and with the right patient access guarantees, we would consider any partnership that advances our mission. But we wouldn't accept terms that shelve our technology to protect existing product lines. A slight smile crossed Kelly's face. Good answer. He closed his tablet case with a decisive click. I'll need to speak with my partners, but expect our term sheet within a week, assuming we all survive this hurricane, of course. As they shook hands, Kelly added, Your presentation yesterday was exceptional, Dr. Bishop, as was your handling of Winters' provocation. Dignity under fire reveals character. With Kelly's departure, Bishop checked his watch. We've got 30 minutes to reach Bennett's plane. Elena was already texting Sophia's assistant. Car's waiting outside. They're holding for us. The hotel exit opened to stinging rain, driven by gusting winds. Their driver, hunched against the weather, hurried them into a black SUV where they found Sophia Bennett already seated reviewing documents. Perfect timing, she said as they settled in. Weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. FAA may start grounding flights within hours. The normally 20-minute drive to the private aviation terminal took nearly 40 minutes through rain-slicked roads and early evacuation traffic. Bennett used the time efficiently diving into detailed questions about MindFrame's neural interface and its potential applications for pilots recovering from strokes or head injuries. The airline industry loses decades of experience when medical issues ground senior pilots, she explained. If your technology could safely return even a portion of them to the cockpit, the economic and safety benefits would be substantial. By the time they reached the private terminal, Bennett had outlined a potential pilot program that would provide MindFrame with real-world testing data while offering Meridian early access to the technology. The terminal itself was a hive of activity, as wealthy conference attendees and corporate executives sought private flights ahead of the storm. Bishop noticed Gregory Winters among them standing with a group near a departure gate, his expression darkening as he spotted Bishop with Bennett. "Looks like we have an audience," Elena murmured. "Focus forward," Bishop replied quietly, a maxim from his flying days. Their credentials were quickly processed and they followed Bennett toward the tarmac doors. Just before they exited, Winters intercepted them, his smile tight and calculating. "Sophia, I didn't realize you were acquainted with Dr. Bishop," he said smoothly. "NeuroSync has been developing a pilot recovery program we'd planned to discuss with Meridian next quarter." Bennett's expression remained professional but cool. "How interesting. Dr. Bishop's approach offers some unique advantages we're exploring immediately. Perhaps the competition will accelerate innovation." Winters' smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Indeed. Though in uncertain times, established partners often provide more reliable outcomes." He turned to Bishop. "I understand Kelly met with you this morning. He's always had a soft spot for underdog ventures." "Mr. Kelly's investment record speaks for itself," Bishop replied evenly. A boarding announcement interrupted them, calling for passengers on several private flights. Winters glanced at the departures board. "That's my flight. Safe travels, everyone." "Bishop, I'm sure we'll continue our conversation in Chicago." As Winters walked away, Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Not a fan, I take it Mr. Winters has concerns about our approach?" Bishop said diplomatically. "And probably about who's delivering it," Bennett observed shrewdly. "I recognized that dynamic yesterday. I've faced similar skepticism as a female CEO in aviation." They proceeded through the tarmac doors into the intensifying storm. Wind-driven rain lashed at them as they hurried toward a sleek Gulfstream G650 with Meridian's logo on the tail. Ground crew in rain gear guided them up the stairs while battling to keep the boarding steps stable in the gusting wind. Inside the aircraft's luxury interior offered a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Bennett introduced them to her executive team, 2 vice presidents who had accompanied her to the conference, before they settled into the comfortable leather seats. "Normally I'd say enjoy the flight," Bennett remarked as they fastened their seatbelts, "but it might be a bit bumpy given the conditions." A flight attendant offered them coffee as the pilots completed their pre-flight checks. Through the windows, Bishop could see other private jets taxiing toward the runway, everyone racing to depart before the weather deteriorated further. Their aircraft began to move, joining the queue for takeoff. Bennett continued their earlier conversation discussing specific pilot recovery metrics while her team took notes. Despite the professional focus, Bishop noticed the tension in everyone's postures as the plane rocked in the strengthening wind. From the cockpit, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently third in line for takeoff. Weather conditions are deteriorating but still within our safety parameters. We expect some turbulence on climb-out, so please remain seated with your belts fastened until we reach cruising altitude." Elena leaned closer to Bishop. Kelly seemed positive. With Bennett's interest, too, we could be looking at both the funding and the industrial partnership we need. Bishop nodded, allowing himself a moment of cautious optimism. Despite Winters' machinations, Mindframe's future was looking brighter than it had 24 hours ago. If they could just get back to Chicago, they could begin implementing the next phase of their strategic plan. The aircraft taxied into position on the runway. Through the rain-streaked windows, Bishop could see the control tower, its warning lights pulsing in the gray morning light. The engines increased their thrust, pushing them back into their seats as the Gulfstream accelerated down the runway and lifted into the turbulent sky. Bishop had experienced countless takeoffs during his military career, but this one felt particularly significant. They were leaving behind Winters' public challenge and rising toward Mindframe's next chapter. The symbolism wasn't lost on him as they climbed through the storm clouds. What he couldn't know was that another more literal storm awaited them, and that before the day ended, his past and present would collide in ways he couldn't imagine. If you know someone who has faced unfair questioning, despite their qualifications, tag them in the comments. Sometimes just knowing others understand can make all the difference. The Gulfstream climbed steeply through the turbulent air, buffeted by wind shear that caused the occasional stomach-dropping lurch. Bishop remained outwardly calm, his military flying experience giving him a different perspective on the rough ascent than some of the other passengers whose white-knuckle grips on their armrests betrayed their anxiety. Not the smoothest departure, Sophia Bennett remarked, her own composure impressive despite the conditions. Captain Rivera is excellent, though. 25 years with military and commercial experience before joining Meridian. The mention of the pilot's background gave Bishop an opening. Military aviation teaches a different relationship with turbulence, he observed. You learn to read it rather than just endure it. Bennett nodded. That's partly why I'm interested in your neural technology. Military pilots develop instincts and responses that can't be taught in simulators. When medical issues ground them, we lose more than just technical skills. Their conversation continued as the aircraft finally broke through the storm layer into smoother air above. The seatbelt sign dinged off and the flight attendant began offering breakfast service. Through the windows, the rising sun illuminated the vast carpet of clouds below their tops, glowing golden while concealing the hurricane's fury beneath. We should reach Chicago in approximately 2 hours. Bennett informed them, checking her watch. I've arranged for ground transportation to take you directly to your office afterward. Bishop thanked her, impressed by the efficiency and thoughtfulness. Elena excused herself to use the lavatory, leaving Bishop and Bennett momentarily alone. May I speak candidly? Dr. Bishop Bennett asked, her tone shifting to something more personal. Of course, I recognized what Gregory Winters was doing yesterday. I've experienced similar tactics throughout my career. She maintained steady eye contact. Your response was masterful. Many would have become defensive or confrontational. Those reactions would only have validated his insinuations, Bishop replied. Bennett nodded. Precisely. It's an exhausting dynamic, having to be perpetually more measured, more professional, more everything than those who never face such scrutiny. She smiled slightly. I imagine your Air Force experience provided useful training. The cockpit doesn't care about your background. Bishop agreed. Only your performance. Unfortunately, the boardroom isn't always so objective. She glanced toward the front of the plane where her executives were reviewing documents. Meridian's interest in Mindframe isn't charity or social responsibility theater. It's recognition of genuine innovation that happens to come from someone who doesn't fit the expected mold. Bishop appreciated her directness. That's refreshing to hear. Don't misunderstand, Bennett continued. We'll be demanding partners with high expectations, but those expectations will be based on results, not preconceptions. Their conversation was interrupted as Elena returned, followed by the flight attendant offering more coffee. As they settled back into discussing technical specifications, Bishop felt cautiously optimistic about the potential partnership with Meridian Airlines. Approximately 45 minutes into the flight, the aircraft encountered another layer of turbulence. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected weather systems related to the hurricane's outer bands. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts until we find smoother air." The turbulence intensified quickly, causing the plane to bounce and shudder. Overhead bins rattled, and the flight attendant hurriedly secured loose items in the galley. Through his window, Bishop could see the wing flexing in the powerful air currents, a normal but unsettling sight for those unaccustomed to aviation physics. "Is this typical?" Elena asked, her usual composure slightly strained. "Uncomfortable, but not dangerous," Bishop assured her. "Modern aircraft are designed to withstand far worse." Bennett was checking her phone, which still showed connectivity. Weather Service shows the storm system intensifying faster than predicted. Several commercial flights have already diverted. The turbulence continued for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally violent enough to send items sliding across tabletops, despite the flight attendants' efforts to secure everything. Bishop noticed Bennett's executives looking increasingly uncomfortable. When the aircraft suddenly dropped several hundred feet before recovering, a standard response to wind shear, one of the executives couldn't suppress a gasp of alarm. Bennett remained impressively calm, though Bishop noted the tightening around her eyes. "Captain Rivera has extensive experience with these conditions," she said, partly to reassure her team, and partly Bishop suspected to maintain the professional atmosphere. Eventually, the turbulence began to subside as the aircraft adjusted its course to avoid the worst of the storm system. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated, but the tension in the cabin gradually eased. "We may arrive slightly behind schedule," Bennett noted, checking her watch, "but still well ahead of the commercial flights, many of which will likely be canceled altogether." The conversation resumed, focusing now on implementation timelines and regulatory considerations for adapting Mindframe's technology to aviation medicine. Bishop was impressed by Bennett's technical knowledge and strategic thinking. Unlike many executives who approached medical technology purely from a business perspective, she understood both the science and its human implications. 2 hours into the flight, they were over Indiana airspace when the captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with a more urgent tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need everyone to confirm their seatbelts are securely fastened. We're encountering some unexpected conditions and may need to change our altitude and routing." Bishop glanced out the window. The clear skies they'd been enjoying had given way to another cloud layer, this one darker and more turbulent looking than before. The aircraft had begun to experience moderate chop again, nothing severe yet, but clearly building. Bennett frowned, checking her phone. "That's odd. The weather system shouldn't have moved this far north yet." The flight attendant approached with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The captain asks that all electronic devices be stowed and tray tables secured," she said. "We'll be experiencing some weather for the next several minutes." As she moved to the next group of passengers, Bishop caught her exchanging a concerned glance with another crew member. Something beyond routine turbulence was happening. The aircraft banked sharply to the left, clearly attempting to reroute around whatever weather system they were approaching. The engines increased their thrust, indicating they were also trying to climb to a higher altitude. Standard procedures for avoiding severe weather, but the abruptness suggested urgency. "Is everything all right?" Elena asked quietly. "They're being cautious," Bishop replied, though his military instincts were now on alert. The rapid course and altitude changes suggested the pilots had received new information requiring immediate action. The turbulence intensified dramatically within minutes. The aircraft shuddered and bucked in the violent air currents. Through brief breaks in the clouds, Bishop could see they were now over what appeared to be agricultural land, rather than the approach corridor to Chicago he'd expected. The intercom crackled again. "This is Captain Rivera. We're diverting to Indianapolis International due to extreme weather conditions now blocking our route to Chicago. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened tightly." Bennett immediately began texting, presumably alerting her Chicago team to the change in plans. "This is unexpected," she said to Bishop and Elena. "The hurricane's effects shouldn't have reached this far inland yet." "Weather systems can be unpredictable," Bishop replied, though he shared her confusion. Something didn't quite add up about the sudden diversion. His suspicion was confirmed moments later when the flight attendant approached Bennett, directly leaning down to speak quietly in her ear. Bennett's expression shifted instantly from mild concern to sharp focus. "Dr. Bishop," she said, after the flight attendant moved away, "Captain Rivera would like to speak with you." "Privately." Bishop raised an eyebrow but unfastened his seatbelt and followed the flight attendant toward the cockpit, steadying himself against the seats as the plane continued to buck in the turbulence. At the cockpit door, the flight attendant keyed in the security code and opened it just enough for Bishop to enter before closing it firmly behind him. Inside the compact space, Bishop found Captain Rivera, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair, focused intently on the controls while her co-pilot appeared slumped in his seat. Dr. Bishop Rivera said without looking away from her instruments, "I understand you're a former Air Force pilot." "F-16s?" "Yes," Bishop confirmed immediately, grasping the situation as he noted the co-pilot's ashen face and irregular breathing. "What happened?" First Officer Garland began experiencing severe chest pain and shortness of breath about 20 minutes ago, Rivera explained tersely. "He's conscious but not fully functional. The weather system has cut us off from direct routing to Chicago, and Indianapolis is reporting severe crosswinds that will make landing challenging." Bishop understood immediately. A single pilot could handle the aircraft, but the combination of medical emergency and difficult weather conditions created a dangerous scenario. "What do you need from me?" he asked, automatically falling into the clipped, efficient communication style of his military days. "Any recent experience with Gulfstream systems?" Rivera asked. "Not specifically, but I've flown similar business jets since leaving the service. Basic principles are the same." Rivera nodded. "I need a functional co-pilot. Not for flying, I'll handle that, but for communication systems monitoring and assistance if things get worse, Ms. Bennett said you might be willing." Bishop didn't hesitate. "Of course." As if to emphasize the urgency, the aircraft lurched violently, causing the incapacitated co-pilot to groan in pain. Outside the windscreen, Bishop could see they were flying through near-zero visibility conditions, the clouds dark and turbulent around them. "Get him secured first," Rivera instructed, never taking her hands off the controls. "Then take his seat. We're 23 minutes from Indianapolis, and it's going to be a rough ride." Bishop moved to the co-pilot, checking his vitals with the practiced efficiency of his medical training. "Likely cardiac event," he assessed quickly. "Irregular but present pulse breathing, labored but adequate for now." Working with the limited space available, Bishop secured the co-pilot more comfortably in his seat while ensuring his oxygen mask remained in place. Then, with Rivera's nod of approval, he slipped into the jump seat behind them, where he could monitor systems and assist if needed. Indianapolis approach. Meridian 347. Rivera radioed. "Medical emergency on board First Officer, incapacitated. Requesting priority landing and medical response team on arrival." The controller's voice came back immediately. "Meridian 347. Indianapolis approach. Priority landing approved. Be advised we're experiencing wind shear on all approaches. Medical response standing by. Descend and maintain 8,000 feet heading 275. Bishop watched as Rivera executed the instructions perfectly, despite the continuing turbulence. Her skill was evident in every movement, every adjustment. This was a pilot who, like himself, had faced worse conditions and prevailed. "Systems check," she requested without looking back. Bishop scanned the relevant displays. "Hydraulics normal, fuel balanced, pressurization stable." He reported the familiar rhythm of the cockpit checklist, returning as if he'd never left it behind. For the next 15 minutes, they worked in tandem, Rivera flying the aircraft with exceptional skill through the brutal conditions, while Bishop monitored systems, communicated with air traffic control, and kept a watchful eye on the ailing first officer. As they began their final approach to Indianapolis, the conditions deteriorated further. Rain lashed at the windscreen and wind shear alerts sounded repeatedly in the cockpit. Visibility was minimal, forcing them to rely almost entirely on instruments. "This is going to be sporty," Rivera commented, her focus absolute. "Ready for a rough touchdown. Runway visual at 2 miles. Bishop confirmed, peering through a momentary break in the downpour. Wind appears to be gusting from the right at approximately 30 knots. Rivera nodded, making a small adjustment to their approach angle to compensate for the crosswind. Landing gear confirmed down and locked, she noted. Flaps at 30 degrees. The aircraft bucked and yawed in the violent air currents as they descended through the final 1,000 feet. Bishop could feel Rivera fighting the controls, using all her skill to keep them stable on the approach path. At 200 feet, a particularly vicious crosswind gust hit them, pushing the aircraft dangerously to the left of the runway center line. Going around, Rivera announced, already advancing the throttles for a missed approach. Indianapolis Tower, Meridian 347, executing missed approach due to wind shear. Bishop radioed while Rivera focused on flying. Meridian 347 understood. The controller responded. Climb and maintain 3,000 feet. Expect vectors for another approach. As they climbed away from the aborted landing attempt, Rivera glanced back at Bishop for the first time. "Good to have another pilot aboard," she said simply. The professional acknowledgement carried more weight than effusive praise ever could. "We'll get it on the next pass," Bishop replied with the quiet confidence of someone who had performed his own share of difficult landings. The storm continued to rage around them as they positioned for a second attempt. The first officer remained semi-conscious, his breathing now more labored. Bishop knew they needed to get him medical attention soon. "Indianapolis approach request runway 35 if available," Rivera radioed. "Might give us a better wind angle. Meridian 347 runway 35 approved. Wind 320 at 28 gusting 35. The new approach seemed more promising initially, with slightly better visibility and a more favorable wind direction. But as they descended through 1,000 feet, the aircraft suddenly shuddered violently as they hit a powerful microburst, a localized column of sinking air that could drive aircraft into the ground if not handled correctly. Rivera reacted instantly, applying full power and pitching up to escape the downdraft. Bishop found himself automatically calling out airspeed and altitude, their pilot-to-pilot communication requiring no explanation or hesitation. 700 feet. Airspeed stable. Clear of the microburst, Bishop reported as they regained a stable approach path. Continuing approach. Rivera confirmed her concentration absolute as they entered the final critical phase of landing. The runway appeared through the rain lights, blurred but visible. Rivera adjusted their descent angle one final time, compensating for the gusting crosswind with practiced precision. 50, 40, 30. Bishop called out the radar altitude as they closed the final distance to the runway, with a skill that impressed even Bishop's experienced eye. Rivera touched down precisely on the center line, immediately deploying thrust reversers and spoilers to slow their momentum on the rain-slicked runway. As they taxied clear, Bishop could see emergency vehicles already positioning near their assigned gate lights, flashing through the downpour. "Textbook landing, Captain," he said sincerely. Rivera allowed herself a brief smile of acknowledgement. Couldn't have done it as smoothly without the assist, Dr. Bishop. "Thank you." Bishop returned to the main cabin to find anxious faces all around. The passengers had clearly sensed the difficulty of the landing, even without knowing about the first officer's condition. "We've landed safely in Indianapolis," he announced. "Medical personnel are standing by for First Officer Garland, who experienced what appears to be a cardiac event." Captain Rivera performed exceptionally well under challenging conditions. The relief in the cabin was palpable. Bennett approached immediately. "Is there anything we can do to help?" "The medical team will board as soon as we reach the gate," Bishop replied. "After that, we'll need to assess our options for continuing to Chicago." As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, Bishop realized that what had begun as a straightforward flight had evolved into something far more complex. The diversion to Indianapolis would delay their return to Chicago by hours, at minimum potentially days, if the weather continued to worsen. What he couldn't know was that this unexpected detour was merely the prelude to an even greater challenge, one that would test not just his flying experience, but everything he had built since leaving the Air Force behind. If this story of quick thinking in a crisis is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button for more stories about extraordinary people rising to meet unexpected challenges. The Indianapolis airport terminal buzzed with unusual activity as diverted flights from across the region filled gates normally reserved for direct service. Electronic boards displayed a sea of yellow and red alerts, delayed and canceled flights creating a visual representation of the weather chaos outside. Through the vast windows, rain continued to pour from leaden skies, occasionally illuminated by distant lightning. Bishop stood with Elena and Bennett near a customer service desk, watching as paramedics wheeled First Officer Garland toward a waiting ambulance. Captain Rivera walked alongside, still in uniform, speaking quietly to the medical team. "They suspect a heart attack," Bishop explained. "His condition is stable for now, but he'll need immediate cardiac evaluation." Bennett nodded grimly. "I've already contacted our flight operations center. They're working on getting us a replacement first officer, but with the storm grounding flights across multiple states, it's going to be challenging." An airport operations manager approached, tablet in hand. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Steve Harrington from Indianapolis Airport Authority. We've arranged a conference room for you and your party while we sort out your options." They followed him through the crowded terminal to a private room where coffee and sandwiches had been provided. Captain Rivera joined them minutes later, her professional demeanor intact despite the stress of the emergency landing. "First Officer Garland is en route to Indianapolis Memorial," she reported. "Initial assessment confirms myocardial infarction. He's conscious and stable." She turned to Bishop. "The paramedic said your quick assessment and assistance likely prevented more serious complications." "Thank you, Doctor." Bishop nodded acknowledgement. "Any update on our continuation options?" "That's the complicated part," Rivera admitted, accepting a coffee from the service tray. "The storm system has now merged with the hurricane's outer bands, creating what meteorologists are calling a weather bomb across the entire Midwest. All flights to Chicago are currently suspended, and Indianapolis itself may begin canceling departures within the hour." Bennett frowned, checking her phone. "My operations team confirms. O'Hare is implementing a ground stop for at least the next 6 hours. Even if we found a replacement first officer immediately, we couldn't proceed to our destination." Elena, ever practical, was already adjusting plans. "Should we look into ground transportation? It's only about a 3-hour drive to Chicago under normal conditions. Highway Patrol is reporting multiple accidents and flooding on I-65. Harrington interjected. "They're advising against all non-essential travel." The situation was quickly evolving from inconvenient to potentially problematic. Bishop considered their options, thinking strategically as he had been trained to do in both military and medical crisis scenarios. "Our priority should be securing accommodations here in Indianapolis," he suggested. "If conditions are deteriorating this quickly, hotel rooms will become scarce as more flights divert." Bennett nodded agreement. "My assistant is already working on that. Meridian maintains relationships with several hotel chains for precisely these scenarios." Captain Rivera's phone chimed with an incoming message. "Flight operations has found a potential first officer in Cincinnati," she reported after reading it. "They could drive here within 4 hours, weather permitting." However, she hesitated, frowning at her screen. "What is it?" Bennett asked. "Regional forecasters are now predicting this system will stall over Indianapolis for at least 24-48 hours. Even with a complete crew, we may be grounded until Sunday." The implications were significant. Today was Friday. being stranded until Sunday would disrupt everyone's schedules and delay the momentum Bishop and Elena had built with both Kelly and Bennett regarding Mindframe's future. "I'll need to notify Chicago," Bishop said, already reaching for his phone. "We have clinical trials ongoing that require oversight. And I have a board meeting Monday morning." Bennett added concern, evident in her voice. As they began making necessary calls, Harrington excused himself to check on their hotel arrangements. Elena stepped aside to contact the Mindframe team, while Bishop updated Diana on their situation. "Stranded in Indianapolis?" Diana asked, her voice concerned but calm. "Are you safe?" "We're fine," Bishop assured her. "Just looking at a delay of potentially several days. The storm system is more severe than predicted. I'm just glad you weren't still airborne when it hit. The news is showing significant turbulence and wind shear throughout the region." "We got lucky," Bishop replied, not mentioning his role in the cockpit during their approach. Diana knew him well enough to read between the lines. "The Twins' soccer game is canceled this weekend anyway because of the weather," she said. "We'll be fine. You focus on taking care of business there." After finishing the call, Bishop rejoined the group just as Harrington returned. "We've secured rooms for your entire party at the airport Marriott," he announced. "However, I should inform you that the National Weather Service has just upgraded this system to a tropical depression. They're now predicting potential flooding throughout the metro area." Bennett thanked him for the update before turning to her team. "It seems we're settling in for a weather siege, everyone. Let's relocate to the hotel and set up a temporary command center there." As they gathered their belongings, Bishop's phone rang. Thomas Kelly calling from Chicago. Bishop Kelly said without preamble when he answered, "Heard your flight diverted. Smart decision. O'Hare is a mess. I barely made it in before they started canceling everything. We're temporarily grounded in Indianapolis," Bishop confirmed, "likely for at least 24 hours. "Weather's historic," Kelly remarked. "Listen, I've reviewed your complete data package. My partners are impressed. We're prepared to move forward with the funding round we discussed pending final documentation. I'll have my team send the term sheet today. Despite their current predicament, this represented a major milestone for Mindframe." "That's excellent news, Mr. Kelly. We'll review it immediately upon receipt." "One more thing," Kelly added. "Winters has been making noise about potential IP conflicts. Nothing substantive, just enough to create uncertainty. Typical tactics." "Keep it in mind if he approaches you with any offers." "Appreciated," Bishop replied. "We'll proceed accordingly." After ending the call, Bishop shared the news with Elena, whose normal professional reserve briefly gave way to a genuine smile. "That's our primary objective achieved," she noted. "If Bennett follows through as well, we'll have both the funding and the industrial partnership we need." Their cautious celebration was interrupted by an airport-wide announcement. "Attention all passengers. Due to deteriorating weather conditions, Indianapolis International Airport will be suspending all departures effective immediately. Passengers are advised to contact their airlines for rebooking information. We apologize for the inconvenience." The announcement triggered immediate reaction throughout the terminal. Passengers rushing toward airline counters, phones appearing in hands everywhere as people attempted to make alternative arrangements. The atmosphere shifted from inconvenienced patience to burgeoning panic. "Time to relocate to the hotel," Bennett decided, signaling to her team. "We'll have more privacy to work there." As they moved toward the exit, Bishop noticed something unusual. A familiar figure speaking animatedly with airport staff near a customer service desk. Gregory Winters. "Unexpected company," Elena murmured, having spotted him too. His flight must have diverted as well. "Indianapolis is the logical alternative to Chicago in these conditions," Bishop noted, though he felt the same unease she did. They continued toward the exit, hoping to avoid an interaction, but Winters turned at precisely the wrong moment. His eyes widened in recognition before narrowing calculatingly. "Dr. Bishop," he called, approaching with forced cordiality. "What an unfortunate coincidence. Your flight diverted as well," Mr. Winters Bishop acknowledged neutrally. Yes, we've arranged accommodations until the weather clears. Winters glanced at the group accompanying Bishop, Bennett, Elena, and the Meridian team, his expression revealing momentary surprise at seeing them together. Quite a delegation, he observed. I wasn't aware you and Sophia had established such a close working relationship. We're exploring several promising collaborations, Bennett replied smoothly. The diversion has actually provided additional time for discussion. Winters smiled thinly. How fortuitous. He turned back to Bishop. I just received word that Thomas Kelly has expedited his review process for your company. Unusually quick decision for him. The implication was clear. Winters had connections within Kelly's organization feeding him information. It was both a warning and an attempt to unsettle Bishop. Mr. Kelly is thorough but efficient. Bishop replied, revealing nothing. Indeed. Winters adjusted his tie. A nervous tell Bishop had noticed yesterday. Perhaps we could continue our discussion from the conference over dinner at the hotel. I suspect we'll all be guests at the airport Marriott, given the limited options. Before Bishop could respond, the terminal lights flickered momentarily. Seconds later, an urgent announcement came over the PA system. Attention all passengers and staff. The National Weather Service has issued a flash flood warning for the airport area. Please remain inside the terminal building until further notice. I repeat, please remain inside the terminal building until further notice. Captain Rivera, who had been conferring with other Meridian pilots nearby, rejoined their group quickly. The situation is deteriorating faster than predicted, she reported. Local authorities are closing several access roads due to flooding. If we're going to reach the hotel, we need to leave now. Bennett made an immediate decision. We have transportation waiting. Mr. Winters, you're welcome to join us if you haven't secured arrangements yet. The offer clearly surprised Winters, though he recovered quickly. Thank you, but I'm still awaiting my luggage. I'll make my own way once it arrives. As they parted ways, Elena whispered to Bishop. That was unexpected. Why would Bennett invite him? Keep your friends close, Bishop replied quietly. Their group moved swiftly through the terminal toward the ground transportation area, where a large black Suburban waited Meridian's logo discreetly visible on the driver's door. They loaded quickly as the rain intensified, pounding the vehicle with almost physical force. Airport Marriott Bennett instructed the driver, who nodded grimly. Roads are flooding quickly, ma'am. We'll take the service route. It's slightly higher ground. As they pulled away from the terminal, Bishop glanced back to see airport staff placing sandbags around doorways, a concerning sign of how serious the flooding threat had become. The normally short drive to the airport hotel stretched to nearly 20 minutes as they navigated around flooded sections of road. Through rain-streaked windows, Bishop could see other vehicles stranded in deepening water, their headlights creating eerie glows beneath the surface. This is unprecedented, Bennett remarked, watching as emergency vehicles with flashing lights passed them heading toward the airport. The meteorologists completely underestimated this system's intensity. When they finally reached the hotel, the lobby was already crowded with stranded travelers. Hotel staff moved efficiently but were clearly overwhelmed by the sudden influx. Bennett's assistant confirmed their reservations, and they were directed to a block of rooms on the 8th floor. We'll gather in the executive suite in 30 minutes, Bennett instructed her team. Dr. Bishop, Ms. Rodriguez, please join us. We should coordinate our approach to this delay. In their assigned room, Bishop and Elena immediately set up their laptops to continue working, despite the disruption. Elena focused on preparing for their eventual return to Chicago, while Bishop reviewed the term sheet that had just arrived from Kelly's team. Terms are favorable, he noted, scanning the document. Higher valuation than we anticipated, reasonable board representation requirements. That's the good news, Elena replied, looking up from her own screen. The bad news is this storm isn't just affecting Indianapolis. Chicago is experiencing significant flooding as well. Our office building has lost power and the backup generators are running." Bishop frowned. The Mindframe laboratories required consistent power for their ongoing experimental work. "Have they implemented the emergency protocols?" "Dr. Patel confirms all critical systems are secured," Elena assured him. "But if power isn't restored within 48 hours, we may lose some of the cell cultures for the next trial phase." The stakes continued to rise. What had begun as a simple conference trip had evolved into a cascade of challenges. Winters' public undermining the diverted flight First Officer Garland's heart attack, and now potential damage to their research from power outages. Bishop was about to respond when a hotel-wide announcement came through the room. "Speakers, attention guests. Due to the severe weather conditions we are experiencing higher than normal occupancy. The hotel management requests that guests limit water usage as the city's pumping stations are under strain. Thank you for your cooperation." "That's concerning," Elena noted. "If municipal services are already struggling." Bishop nodded agreement. "This situation could deteriorate further before it improves." Outside the window, the rain continued, unabated sheets of water cascading down the glass. Occasional lightning flashes illuminated the airport complex where standing water had begun to accumulate on taxiways and service roads. In the parking lot below, water already reached the hubcaps of cars in the lower sections. What had begun as a weather inconvenience was rapidly becoming something more serious, and the worst was yet to come. Have you ever found yourself unexpectedly stranded during a weather crisis? Share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes the most remarkable connections form during these unexpected detours. The hotel conference room had been hastily converted into an emergency briefing center. Representatives from the airport local emergency management, the National Weather Service, and the hotel's management team stood before a growing crowd of stranded travelers. Maps projected on the wall showed alarming red zones where flooding had already cut off major roads surrounding the airport complex. Bishop, Elena, and the Meridian team had secured seats near the front, their experience with crisis management evident in their calm, focused demeanors amid the anxious crowd. Gregory Winters had appeared as well, standing at the back of the room with his phone pressed to his ear. His normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled after presumably making his way from the airport through the worsening conditions. "Ladies and gentlemen," the emergency management representative began, "we are facing an unprecedented weather situation. The merger of the hurricane's outer bands with the existing frontal system has created what meteorologists are calling a stalled tropical depression directly over the Indianapolis metro area." He gestured to the rainfall projection map. "We've already received 9 inches of rain in the past 6 hours, with an additional 8 to 12 inches expected overnight. The White River is approaching flood stage, and several local creeks have already overflowed their banks." Murmurs of concern rippled through the audience as the implications became clear. "For your safety, all airport hotel guests are being asked to remain in the building until further notice. The National Guard has been mobilized to assist with emergency operations, but their resources are stretched thin across multiple affected areas." Bennett leaned toward Bishop. "This is worse than any weather briefing I've received in 20 years of aviation." Bishop nodded, his military assessment instincts automatically cataloging the most critical information. "The airport's elevation provides some protection, but if those rainfall projections are accurate, we're looking at significant infrastructure challenges. Power, water, possibly communications." The hotel manager stepped forward next. "We're implementing our emergency protocols. All guests are being moved to the 4th floor and above as a precautionary measure. We have generator capacity for essential systems, and we've secured additional food and water supplies. However, we ask everyone to conserve resources as we don't know how long this situation will last." As the briefing continued, Bishop noticed Captain Rivera receiving a message on her phone. Her expression shifted from professional attention to sharp concern. "What is it?" he asked quietly when she looked up. "The hospital just notified me," she replied in a low voice. They're evacuating patients from the lower floors due to flooding concerns. First Officer Garland is being transferred to another facility 20 miles north. Bishop frowned. In these conditions, that's a high-risk transport. Rivera nodded grimly. They don't have a choice. The alternative is potentially worse. The emergency briefing concluded with instructions for guests to return to their rooms, gather essential items, and prepare for possible relocation to designated shelter areas within the hotel if conditions worsened. As people began filing out, Bishop noticed Winters making his way toward them through the dispersing crowd. Dr. Bishop Winters greeted him with forced cordiality. Quite a situation we find ourselves in. Mr. Winters Bishop acknowledged neutrally. I've just spoken with our Chicago office. Winters continued. The flooding there is causing significant problems for several medical facilities, including Northwestern Memorial, where I believe your clinical trials are being conducted. The implied threat was subtle but clear. Winters was suggesting that Mindframe's research might be compromised by the storm, potentially affecting their valuation and investor confidence. Our protocols include comprehensive emergency contingencies, Bishop replied evenly. All critical systems and data are secured. Winters smiled thinly. I'm sure they are. Still, these unexpected disruptions can create opportunities for collaboration. NeuroSync's infrastructure was designed with redundant safeguards across multiple locations. Perhaps this situation illustrates the advantages of partnering with an established organization. Before Bishop could respond, a hotel staff member approached their group. Captain Rivera. There's an urgent call for you at the front desk. Rivera excused herself immediately. Bishop watched her go, sensing that this unexpected development might signal further complications. If you'll excuse us, Bishop said to Winters, we need to assess our situation and contact our team in Chicago. Winters nodded, unperturbed by the dismissal. Of course. We'll have plenty of time to continue our discussion. It appears we're all going to be guests here longer than anticipated. As Winters walked away, Elena muttered, even a natural disaster doesn't stop his maneuvering. Especially a natural disaster, Bishop corrected. Crisis creates leverage for those willing to exploit it. They made their way back to their rooms to collect essential items as instructed. Bishop was packing his medical credentials and emergency medications when Elena received a call from their Chicago office. Power's completely out in the research wing, she reported after hanging up. Backup generators are running at 60% capacity due to flooding in the basement level. Dr. Patel has initiated the emergency preservation protocol for the neural tissue samples. Bishop nodded grimly. Those samples represented months of careful cultivation, critical components for their next phase of clinical trials. Losing them would set the research back significantly. Have them transfer the most critical samples to Northwestern's secure storage if possible, he instructed. They have cryogenic facilities that operate on independent power systems. Elena made note of his direction. I'll coordinate with Patel immediately. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knocking. Bishop opened the door to find Sophia Bennett, her expression tense. We need to speak privately, she said without preamble. Captain Rivera just received concerning news. They followed Bennett to the executive suite where Rivera waited still in her pilot's uniform, though she'd removed the jacket. Her professional composure remained intact, but Bishop could detect the underlying tension in her posture. The situation has escalated, Rivera explained once the door closed. Indianapolis Air Traffic Control has lost primary power. They're operating on emergency systems, but their radar coverage is limited. Additionally, the airport's main access road is now completely flooded, effectively isolating the entire complex. Bennett took over. The concerning development is that a Meridian Airlines 737 with 167 passengers and crew is currently holding about 100 miles west of Indianapolis. They declared a medical emergency approximately 30 minutes ago. Their captain has become incapacitated. Bishop immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. Similar to Garland, unclear, Rivera replied. Initial reports suggest possible stroke symptoms. The first officer has taken command, but they need to land as soon as possible, and Chicago is still closed. Indianapolis can't take them, Elena asked. The airport is technically closed due to flooding, Rivera explained, but they're considering an emergency exception given the medical situation. The problem is that the first officer is relatively inexperienced. Only 800 hours total time, just transitioned to the 737 3 months ago. Bennett turned to Bishop directly. We understand you're a former military pilot with significant experience. Captain Rivera believes you might be able to assist. Bishop processed the request quickly. What kind of assistance are you suggesting? I'm not current on commercial aircraft. The first officer needs guidance for landing in these extreme conditions, Rivera explained. We can establish communication from here to the aircraft. Your military experience, especially with difficult landings, could prove invaluable. The request was unusual, but made sense given the circumstances. Bishop had extensive experience with emergency landings in adverse conditions from his military service. Though the aircraft systems were different, the fundamental principles of aviation remained the same. I'm willing to help however I can, Bishop confirmed. But I want to be clear about my limitations. I can advise, but the responsibility remains with the active flight crew. Bennett nodded. Understood. We've established a communication link in the hotel's business center. Airport operations has provided access to their systems remotely. As they prepared to leave, Elena caught Bishop's arm. Alexander, are you sure about this? The liability implications alone? This isn't about liability, Bishop replied quietly. It's about 167 lives potentially at risk. They relocated to the business center, which had been quickly converted to a makeshift operation room. A hotel staff member explained that their satellite communications remained operational, despite the weather allowing them to establish direct contact with both the airport and the aircraft in distress. Captain Rivera immediately took charge, setting up the communication links while explaining the situation to Bishop in more detail. Meridian Flight 227 Boeing 737-800, Captain James Sullivan incapacitated with apparent stroke symptoms. First Officer Kristen Walsh now in command with Flight Attendant David Chen assisting in the cockpit. Weather at Indianapolis still severe but technically within landing parameters if executed perfectly. Bishop nodded, absorbing the information as Rivera handed him a headset. We're patched directly to Flight 227 through Indianapolis approach control. They're expecting your assistance. Taking the headset, Bishop settled into the chair, his mind automatically shifting into the focused clarity he had developed during his military flying days. He adjusted the microphone and pressed the transmit button. Meridian 227. This is Dr. Alexander Bishop at Indianapolis Coordination Center. I understand you have a situation aboard. After a moment of static, a female voice responded, the strain evident despite her professional tone. Coordination Center, this is First Officer Walsh. Captain Sullivan he's unresponsive. I've got the aircraft stabilized at flight level 280, but I need to get on the ground as soon as possible. Understood. First Officer Walsh. Bishop replied calmly. I'm a former Air Force fighter pilot with emergency landing experience. I'm here to assist you through this process. What's your fuel state and aircraft condition? Fuel for approximately 90 minutes of flight time remaining, Walsh reported. Aircraft systems all normal. Weather radar showing severe precipitation along our route. Copy that, Bishop acknowledged. Indianapolis approach, this is Coordination Center. What's the current runway status? A new voice joined the communication. Coordination Center. Indianapolis approach. Runway 23 is operational with significant crosswinds gusting to 40 knots. Visibility 1 mile in heavy precipitation. Runway 5 is reporting standing water, but remains above minimums. Bishop considered this information quickly. First Officer Walsh, how much experience do you have with crosswind landings in the 737? There was a brief hesitation. Limited. Most of my training was in ideal conditions. I've handled up to 15-knot crosswinds, but nothing approaching current conditions. The honesty was commendable and confirmed Bishop's concern that this was beyond the first officer's experience level. "Understood. Here's what we're going to do," Bishop said, his voice conveying confident authority. "We'll plan an approach to runway 23 using the ILS. I'll talk you through the crosswind technique. Indianapolis approach. Can you confirm ILS functionality for runway 23 Affirmative Coordination Center? ILS is fully operational." Bishop glanced at Rivera, who nodded approval at his approach. "First Officer Walsh, I want you to brief your cabin for a potential hard landing. Secure all loose items in the cockpit and ensure your flight attendants understand this will be challenging." "Already done," Walsh confirmed. "Senior flight attendant has prepared the cabin." "Excellent," Bishop replied. "Now let's discuss the approach sequence step by step." For the next several minutes, Bishop methodically walked Walsh through the approach procedure, explaining the crosswind landing technique and potential complications. He drew on his military experience translating complex aerodynamic principles into clear, actionable instructions. Throughout the exchange, he maintained a calm, assured tone that seemed to have a settling effect on the first officer. Walsh's responses became progressively more composed as they established a working rhythm. In the background, Bishop was vaguely aware of others entering the business center, hotel management, emergency personnel, and at one point Gregory Winters, whose expression revealed surprise at finding Bishop in this unexpected role. Meridian 227. "You're cleared for the approach," Indianapolis Approach Control announced. "Winds now 260 at 38 knots, gusting to 45. Ceiling 400 feet, visibility 3/4 of a mile in heavy rain." Bishop exchanged glances with Rivera. Those were extremely challenging conditions, even for experienced pilots. First Officer Walsh Bishop said these conditions are at the edge of safety parameters. There's no shame in diverting if you're uncomfortable with the approach. Nearest alternate is Louisville, and they're reporting similar conditions, Walsh replied. "Captain Sullivan needs medical attention as soon as possible. I want to proceed." "Understood." Bishop acknowledged, respecting her decision. "Remember what we discussed about the crosswind correction. Start with a crab angle into the wind transition to a wing-low technique during flare. Apply right rudder to align with the runway center line while keeping the right wing down to counter the crosswind." "Copy that," Walsh confirmed. "Beginning approach now." The tension in the room was palpable as they listened to the cockpit communications. Walsh provided periodic altitude and airspeed calls as the aircraft descended through the stormy conditions. Bishop offered calm guidance at each phase, his voice steady and assured. Passing 1,000 feet, Walsh reported. "Still in the clouds." "Looking good," Bishop encouraged. "Maintain your glide slope." Airspeed. Airspeed 145 knots, slightly above reference due to gusts. "That's appropriate. Be prepared for wind shear below 500 feet. As the aircraft continued its descent, Bishop felt the familiar focus of mission concentration, the outside world fading away as his attention narrowed to the task at hand. In this moment, he wasn't a neurosurgeon or CEO, but once again, Captain Alexander Bishop, USAF, guiding an aircraft through dangerous conditions. 400 feet. "I have the runway in sight." Walsh reported, a note of relief in her voice. "Maintain your approach," Bishop instructed. "Remember, the gusty conditions will try to lift your upwind wing. Be ready with opposite aileron. 200 feet. Wind really buffeting us now. Stay with it. You're doing great. 100 feet. The radio fell silent for several seconds, the most critical phase of the landing now underway. Everyone in the business center seemed to hold their breath collectively. Then Walsh's voice returned, breathless but triumphant. "Coordination Center, Meridian 227 is on the ground. Rolling out on runway 23. A spontaneous cheer erupted in the business center. Bishop allowed himself a small smile of relief, but remained focused. "Excellent work, First Officer Walsh. Maintain your crosswind correction during rollout. The wind will still try to weather vane the aircraft." "Affirmative," Walsh confirmed. Maintaining correction. Speed coming down through 80 knots. Perfect. Use maximum braking considering the wet runway. Better to use the full runway length than risk hydroplaning. After another tense minute, Walsh reported aircraft speed below 30 knots. Turning off at taxiway Charlie as instructed by ground control. Medical team visible on the taxiway. "Congratulations," First Officer Bishop said sincerely. "Exceptional landing under extremely difficult conditions." As Walsh thanked him and signed off to coordinate with ground personnel, Bishop removed his headset, suddenly aware of the crowd that had gathered in the business center. Bennett was beaming with pride, Rivera nodding approval, and even Winters looked grudgingly impressed. That Rivera said quietly to Bishop was masterful guidance. "You just helped save 167 lives." Before Bishop could respond, the hotel manager stepped forward. "Dr. Bishop, there's a situation developing. The emergency medical coordinator asked for you specifically when they heard you were here. Apparently they're overwhelmed with weather-related injuries and the hospital evacuation. They're setting up a triage center in the hotel ballroom and need all available medical personnel." Bishop exchanged glances with Elena, who nodded understanding. "I'll gather my credentials and emergency kit," he told the manager. "Where should I report?" "Main ballroom east wing," the manager replied. "They're bringing in patients now." As Bishop rose to prepare for this new challenge, he noticed Winters watching him with an unreadable expression. For once, the NeuroSync executive seemed at a loss for words, confronted with a side of Alexander Bishop he hadn't anticipated. Bishop moved toward the door, his mind already shifting gears from pilot to physician. Behind him, he heard an elderly woman's voice speak to someone nearby. "That man just talked a plane down through a hurricane, and now he's going to treat the injured. Who is he?" "That's Dr. Alexander Bishop," Elena replied with quiet pride. "He's exactly who we need right now." The crisis was far from over, but in this moment, caught between storm and salvation, Bishop found himself exactly where he needed to be, drawing on all facets of his experience to meet the escalating challenges. The journey that had begun with Winters' public challenge had evolved into something far more consequential than corporate rivalry, and it was about to demand even more from him. This story just reached a critical moment. If you're as captivated as we are by Dr. Bishop's remarkable ability to stay calm under pressure, hit that like button and subscribe to follow the rest of this extraordinary journey. The hotel ballroom had transformed into a makeshift emergency center with remarkable efficiency. Hotel staff had pushed the elegant furniture to the walls, creating open space where medical personnel could work. Tablecloths now served as makeshift privacy screens, and LED convention lighting had been repositioned to illuminate treatment areas. Bishop entered wearing his white dress shirt with sleeves rolled up, his emergency medical kit in hand. Elena had helped him gather additional supplies from the hotel's first aid stations before heading to coordinate communications with their Chicago office. A harried woman in scrubs spotted him and approached quickly. "Dr. Bishop, I'm Dr. Melissa Chen, Emergency Medicine. Thank you for coming. We're establishing a triage system for incoming patients from the flooded areas and the hospital evacuation." Bishop assessed the situation with a practiced eye. "What resources do we have available?" Limited, Dr. Chen admitted. "2 emergency physicians, including myself, 1 surgical resident, 3 nurses, and now you. Hotel staff are acting as assistants. We have basic medications, some IV supplies, and emergency equipment from 2 ambulances that became stranded here." "What about patient transport options?" Bishop asked, immediately thinking strategically. "Almost none. The flooding has cut off ground access in all directions. National Guard helicopters are prioritizing life-threatening emergencies, but they're limited by the weather conditions." Bishop nodded, processing the information. "I'm a neurosurgeon by training, but I have combat medical experience from Afghanistan. I can handle a wide range of trauma cases." Relief washed over Dr. Chen's face. "That's exactly what we need. We're expecting casualties from structural collapses and vehicle accidents. Can you take the yellow triage section? Moderate injuries requiring significant care but not immediately life-threatening. Absolutely. Bishop confirmed, already moving toward the designated area where several patients waited on improvised beds. He worked methodically through the first cases. A construction worker with a suspected broken arm, an elderly woman with exacerbated congestive heart failure, a hotel employee with a deep laceration from broken glass. Bishop's hands moved with practiced precision, his manner calm and reassuring despite the chaotic surroundings. "You've done this before," the construction worker observed as Bishop set his fractured radius with improvised materials. "Different setting, similar principles?" Bishop replied with a slight smile, securing the splint. "How did you get caught in the flooding?" "Working on a site near the river. Water came up so fast we barely had time to evacuate. I slipped getting into the truck." The man winced as Bishop adjusted the bandage. "Never seen anything like it. Water rising inches every minute." Bishop nodded sympathetically. "You'll need proper casting once we can get you to a hospital. For now, this should stabilize the fracture and manage the pain." As he finished with the patient, a young nurse approached. "Dr. Bishop, we have a new arrival with a head laceration and possible concussion. Elderly female disoriented." Bishop followed her to find an older Hispanic woman sitting on the edge of a makeshift bed, a blood-soaked towel pressed to her forehead. With a jolt of recognition, he realized it was the same woman he'd seen on their flight from the conference. "I'm Dr. Bishop," he said gently, taking a seat beside her. "May I examine your injury?" She looked up, recognition dawning in her eyes despite her confusion. "You're the pilot." "The doctor." "From the plane." "That's right," he confirmed, carefully removing the towel to assess the laceration. "I need to clean this wound and possibly place some sutures." "What's your name? Lucia Ramirez?" she replied, wincing as he began cleaning the wound. "I was trying to help some children who were stranded in the lobby when part of a ceiling panel came down." Bishop worked carefully, examining her for signs of concussion while cleaning and closing the wound. "You'll need a few stitches, Mrs. Ramirez. I'll use local anesthesia." As he prepared the suture kit, Lucia studied him with surprising clarity despite her injury. "You move between worlds so easily," she observed. "From the cockpit to medicine all in one day." Bishop smiled slightly as he began suturing. "Circumstances sometimes demand flexibility. More than flexibility," she countered. "Integration. My grandson was a combat medic in Iraq. He said the best doctors were those who understood both healing and harm." Bishop continued his precise work, but her words resonated with him. Throughout his career, he had faced those who questioned the unusual combination of his skills, as if expertise in one domain somehow diminished capability in another. "Almost done," he said, placing the final suture. "You'll need to rest and have someone monitor you for the next 24 hours. Do you have family with you?" Lucia shook her head. "I was traveling alone to visit my daughter in Chicago. Then we'll make arrangements for regular check-ins," Bishop decided. "I'll speak with the nursing staff." As he completed her care, Bishop became aware of someone watching him. Looking up, he saw Gregory Winters standing near the entrance to the treatment area, his expression uncharacteristically subdued. "I didn't realize you had combat medical training," Winters said as Bishop approached. "3 tours in Afghanistan," Bishop replied simply. "You learn to make do with limited resources." Winters seemed about to say something else when they were interrupted by a commotion at the ballroom entrance. Hotel security personnel were carrying an unconscious man on an improvised stretcher. "Cardiac arrest," someone shouted. "We need a doctor here now." Bishop immediately moved toward them, recognizing the unconscious man as hotel manager Harrington, the same person who had been coordinating emergency operations throughout the day. "Put him here," Bishop directed, clearing space on a nearby table. "What happened?" "He collapsed while helping evacuate guests from the flooded East Wing," a security officer explained. "No pulse when we found him." Bishop immediately began chest compressions while calling for the emergency defibrillator. Dr. Chen joined him seconds later, and together they established an advanced cardiac life support protocol despite their limited resources. Continue compressions. Bishop instructed a nurse while he prepared the defibrillator. Dr. Chen, can you establish an airway? They worked in seamless coordination, medical training, transcending the improvised setting. Winters stood back watching with undisguised amazement as Bishop shifted effortlessly into emergency physician mode, his movements precise and decisive. Clear, Bishop announced, applying the defibrillator pads. The manager's body jerked as the shock was delivered, but the monitor continued to show no cardiac rhythm. Resume compressions. Bishop ordered, already preparing epinephrine. Push 1 milligram IV. After the medication was administered, they shocked him again. This time, the monitor showed a weak but definite cardiac rhythm. We have a pulse, Bishop confirmed, checking the carotid artery. Let's get him stabilized. As they continued emergency treatment, Bishop noticed the ballroom had fallen unusually quiet. Many people had paused to watch the resuscitation effort, their expressions a mixture of concern and hope. Once Harrington was stabilized with an IV in place and oxygen flowing, Bishop stepped back, allowing Dr. Chen to continue monitoring. As he turned away, he found himself face to face with Winters again. "You just saved that man's life," Winters said quietly, his usual competitive edge nowhere in evidence. "We won't know for sure until we can get him to a proper cardiac center," Bishop replied. "But he has a fighting chance now. You know what I mean?" Winters persisted. "I've been watching you since you walked in here. You've treated at least a dozen patients in the past hour, moving between cases with complete authority despite the chaos." Bishop met his gaze evenly. "People need help. I have the training to provide it. It's more than training," Winters observed. "It's integration of multiple domains of expertise: fighter pilot, combat medic, neurosurgeon, corporate CEO, all functioning simultaneously." Before Bishop could respond, Elena appeared at his side. "Alexander, we have a situation. The hotel structural engineers are reporting increased water pressure against the north wall. They're concerned about potential structural failure if the water continues rising." Bishop immediately shifted focus. "What's their timeline?" "They're saying we have maybe 3 hours before we reach critical pressure levels. They're implementing emergency water diversion, but with the volume they're facing." "What's the evacuation plan?" Bishop asked. "That's the problem," Elena replied grimly. "With the airport access roads flooded and helicopter operations limited by the weather, we have limited options for relocating everyone." Bishop considered this information rapidly. "What about the central terminal?" "It's on higher ground with newer construction. The connectors are already underwater in sections, but they're assessing a potential evacuation route through the service tunnels." Winters, who had been listening to their exchange, spoke up unexpectedly. "I have some experience with structural engineering from my university days. Perhaps I could assist with the assessment." Bishop and Elena exchanged surprised glances at this unexpected offer. "Any help would be appreciated," Bishop acknowledged after a moment. "The structural engineering team is set up near the main lobby." As Winters departed, Elena raised an eyebrow. That was unexpected. "Crisis reveals character," Bishop observed. "Sometimes aspects even the person didn't know were there." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Chen, who approached with an urgent expression. "Dr. Bishop, we have another critical situation. A pregnant woman in active labor just arrived from one of the flooded neighborhoods. Apparently, she was being transported to the hospital when their ambulance got stranded." Bishop immediately followed her to a curtained-off section where a young woman lay on an improvised bed, her face contorted in pain as another contraction gripped her. "I'm Dr. Bishop." He introduced himself, quickly assessing the situation. "What's your name?" "Maria Garcia." The woman gasped as the contraction eased. "My baby's not due for another 3 weeks, but the contraction started when the flood hit our neighborhood." Bishop nodded reassuringly. Let's see what we're dealing with. He turned to Dr. Chen. Do we have obstetric supplies? Very limited, she admitted. The paramedics who brought her in had some basic delivery equipment in their kit, but nothing for complications. Let's hope for an uncomplicated delivery. Then, Bishop replied, already mentally reviewing his obstetric training. Though not his specialty, every medical resident rotated through obstetrics, and his combat experience had included emergency deliveries in far worse conditions than these. For the next hour, Bishop focused entirely on Maria and her imminent delivery. Her contractions were progressing rapidly, and examination confirmed she was already fully dilated. "You're doing great, Maria," he encouraged her as another contraction began. "With the next one, I want you to push." Maria nodded determination, replacing fear in her expression. Her husband Jorge held her hand tightly, murmuring encouragement in Spanish. 3 contractions later, Bishop could see the baby's head crowning. One more big push, he instructed calmly. With a final effort, Maria pushed as Bishop guided the baby's shoulders through, then the rest of the body slipped free. A strong cry filled the air moments later. A perfect, healthy boy, despite the chaotic circumstances of his birth. "Congratulations," Bishop said, placing the newborn on Maria's chest after the initial assessment. "He's perfect." The joy of this new life amid the surrounding crisis created a powerful moment of hope. Staff and patients nearby broke into spontaneous applause, the simple miracle of birth providing a welcome counterpoint to the emergency conditions. As Bishop completed the post-delivery care, he noticed Lucia Ramirez watching from a nearby bed where she was resting. "Life continues even in the midst of chaos," she observed when he approached to check her condition. "Your hands bring both guidance and healing today. How are you feeling?" he asked, checking her pupils again for signs of concussion. "Better," she replied. "The headache is fading." Her gaze was direct and perceptive. "But I'm more interested in you, doctor. I've been watching since they brought me in. You move between roles with remarkable fluidity, like someone who has found their purpose regardless of the title or setting." Before Bishop could respond, a structural engineer entered the ballroom looking urgently around until she spotted him. "Dr. Bishop, I'm Vanessa Reyes from the structural assessment team. We need to speak with you immediately. The situation is developing faster than we anticipated." Bishop excused himself from Lucia and followed Reyes to where a small group had gathered, including Elena Sophia Bennett and, surprisingly, Gregory Winters. "We've detected significant movement in the North Wall Foundation," Reyes explained without preamble, showing Bishop a tablet with structural monitoring data. "The water pressure is exceeding our safety margins much faster than projected. We need to implement evacuation procedures immediately." "How long do we have?" Bishop asked, examining the data. 2 hours at most before we reach critical stress levels. After that, we risk catastrophic failure of load-bearing elements." Bishop processed this rapidly. "What's our evacuation route?" "The service tunnel to the central terminal remains our best option," Reyes replied. "It's narrow and partially flooded in sections, but should remain passable if we move quickly." "What about patients who can't walk?" Bishop asked. "We have at least 30 people here who would require assistance." Winters stepped forward unexpectedly. "I've been working with the hotel engineering team. We've identified an alternative route through the kitchen service corridor that's wider and slightly higher elevation. It would accommodate stretchers, though it's longer." Bishop studied him with renewed interest. This was a different Winters than the corporate antagonist from yesterday's conference, engaged, practical, and genuinely contributing to the collective effort. "We'll need to move the most critical patients first," Bishop decided. "Doctor Chen can coordinate medical prioritization while we establish the evacuation route." Bennett added, "My team can help with general evacuation organization. We have experience with emergency protocols from our airline operations." As they began implementing the evacuation plan, Bishop moved through the ballroom working with Dr. Chen to identify priority cases and prepare them for transport. The atmosphere had changed from earlier chaos to focused urgency, everyone understanding the gravity of the situation and working together with remarkable cooperation. Winters approached as Bishop was preparing the cardiac patient for transport. "I've confirmed the kitchen route with the structural team," he reported. "They're setting up emergency lighting and guide ropes now." He hesitated, then added with unexpected sincerity, "Your leadership is making a significant difference here, Bishop. These people trust you." Bishop nodded acknowledgement, too focused on the immediate tasks to fully process this shift in their dynamic. "We'll need all hands for the critical patient transfers. Can you help coordinate the volunteer teams?" "Of course," Winters replied without hesitation. Throughout the next hour, Bishop directed the medical evacuation, working side by side with Dr. Chen Elena and the nursing staff to move the most vulnerable patients. Winters proved surprisingly capable organizing volunteer teams and ensuring clear communication throughout the process. The situation grew increasingly urgent as water began seeping visibly through the lower sections of the north wall, concrete darkening with moisture as the structural pressure intensified. Periodic creaking sounds from the building's frame underscored the danger they faced. Last critical patient ready for transport, Dr. Chen reported as they secured Maria Garcia and her newborn on a makeshift stretcher. "We should begin general evacuation immediately." Bishop nodded agreement. "Elena, please coordinate with Bennett's team to organize the remaining guests by floors. Winters is the kitchen route fully prepared, ready and staffed with guides." Winters confirmed. "We've established checkpoints every 50 meters. As they prepared to move the final critical patients, Bishop became aware of Lucia Ramirez watching him from nearby. Despite her injury, she had insisted on helping with other patients, providing comfort and translation for Spanish-speaking evacuees. "You've found your purpose, Doctor," she said quietly as he passed. "Not in any single role, but in the integration of all your capabilities when needed most." Her observation struck him deeply, articulating something he had intuitively understood but rarely heard expressed by others. Throughout his career, he had faced those who questioned his unusual combination of expertise, as if excellence in one domain somehow diminished capability in another. Yet here, amid crisis, those artificial boundaries had dissolved. His value emerged precisely from the integration she described: the fighter pilot's decisive risk assessment, the surgeon's precise technique, the CEO's strategic leadership, all functioning simultaneously as the situation demanded. The general evacuation began with remarkable order considering the circumstances. Bennett's airline crew provided calm, authoritative guidance, while hotel staff and volunteers assisted those with mobility issues. Throughout this process, Bishop continued moving between medical supervision and overall coordination, working in unexpected tandem with Winters, whose organizational abilities proved genuinely valuable. As the ballroom emptied, Bishop performed a final sweep, ensuring no patients remained. The water seepage along the north wall had worsened noticeably now, forming small rivulets across the floor. The creaking sounds from the structure had increased in frequency. Clear warnings from a building under intense stress. Bishop Winters called urgently from the doorway. "We need to leave now. The structural team says we're approaching critical stress levels." Bishop nodded, making one last visual confirmation of the empty room before joining Winters. They moved swiftly through corridors that now showed visible signs of structural strain. Hairline cracks appearing in walls, ceiling tiles sagging from moisture. They reached the kitchen service corridor, which had been transformed into an evacuation route with emergency lighting and guide ropes. Water already covered the floor in sections, though still shallow enough for safe passage. "Most guests are already through," Winters reported as they began moving along the corridor. "Bennett's team is coordinating reception at the central terminal." As they proceeded, the building emitted an ominous deep groan, the sound of major structural elements under extreme pressure. Both men instinctively quickened their pace. "How did you know about this route?" Bishop asked as they navigated around a partially flooded section. "I worked construction during college summers," Winters replied, surprising Bishop once again. Learn to read building plans. When the north wall started showing stress, I asked to see the hotel's structural blueprints. This glimpse of Winters' background, so different from his polished corporate image, suggested depths Bishop hadn't previously considered. They were halfway through the passage when a hotel security officer ran toward them from the central terminal end, his expression urgent. "Dr. Bishop, we need you immediately." During the final room checks, we found an elderly man who had fallen in the west wing. He appears to have a broken hip and can't walk. Bishop and Winters exchanged glances, both understanding the implications. The structural assessment team had indicated imminent failure of the north wall. Returning to the hotel would mean significant risk. Where exactly, Bishop asked, without hesitation. "Fourth floor, West Wing, room 412. The security officer replied, "He's conscious but in severe pain." Bishop turned to Winters. "Continue to the central terminal. Let the evacuation coordinators know the situation." "You're going back?" Winters asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. "I can't leave him there," Bishop replied simply. To Bishop's surprise, Winters shook his head. "I'm coming with you. You'll need help transporting him." Bishop studied him for a moment, recognizing genuine resolve in the man who had so publicly questioned his credentials just a day earlier. "Let's move quickly then," Bishop decided. Together they retraced their steps, moving against the flow of the final evacuees. The security officer led them through service corridors to minimize exposure to the increasingly compromised north sections of the building. When they reached room 412, they found an elderly man lying on the floor beside the bed, his face pale with pain. Bishop immediately recognized the signs of a displaced hip fracture, a potentially life-threatening injury in someone of advanced age, particularly without prompt medical attention. "I'm Dr. Bishop," he introduced himself, kneeling to perform a quick assessment. "We're going to get you out of here." "What's your name?" "Walter Jenkins," the man replied through gritted teeth. "I was trying to reach my medication when I fell. Couldn't get up, couldn't reach the phone." "A hip fracture," Bishop confirmed after gentle examination. "We'll need to improvise a stretcher. Moving you will be painful, but we don't have options." Winters was already searching the room, gathering sheets from the bed and the curtain rod from the window. "We can create a sling stretcher using these," he suggested. Bishop nodded approval, impressed by Winters' practical thinking. Together they quickly fashioned a workable stretcher and carefully transferred Jenkins onto it. "This is going to hurt, Bishop," warned the elderly man. "I can give you something for pain, but I need to keep the dose low enough that you remain conscious during transport." After administering medication from his emergency kit, Bishop nodded to Winters. "Ready." With Jenkins secured on their improvised stretcher, they began the difficult journey back toward the evacuation route. The hotel had become eerily quiet, the last evacuees now gone. The creaking and groaning of the structure had intensified, and new water stains were visible on walls and ceilings they had passed just minutes earlier. They had just reached the main corridor when a deep, ominous sound reverberated through the building, more felt than heard, like the fundamental note of a massive instrument. Dust sifted down from ceiling tiles as the floor trembled slightly beneath them. "We need to move faster," Bishop urged, adjusting his grip on the stretcher. That was a primary support element shifting. They increased their pace as much as possible while maintaining care with their injured patient. Jenkins bore the journey with remarkable stoicism, only occasional sharp intakes of breath betraying his pain when the stretcher jostled. When they finally reached the kitchen evacuation route, they found the water level had risen significantly, now ankle-deep in sections and flowing with noticeable current. The structural failure must be accelerating water entry, Winters observed grimly. They proceeded carefully, the added weight of Jenkins on the stretcher making their footing precarious in the flowing water. Halfway through the passage, they encountered a section where water now reached mid-calf, flowing swiftly from a junction where pipes had begun leaking. "Careful here," Bishop warned as they navigated the makeshift waterfall. The floor will be slippery. They had just cleared this obstacle when the most ominous sound yet thundered through the structure. A deep, resonant crack followed by the unmistakable rush of water under significant pressure. "The north wall has failed," Winters said, his voice tense but controlled. "We have minutes at most." They increased their pace again, moving as quickly as possible while maintaining control of the stretcher. Jenkins grimaced with each jolting step but remained remarkably composed. Almost there, Bishop encouraged him. "You're doing great, Mr. Jenkins." After what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps 15 minutes, they emerged from the service corridor into the central terminal where Elena and Bennett waited anxiously with emergency personnel. "Thank God," Elena breathed as they appeared. "We were about to send a search team." Medical staff immediately took charge of Jenkins, transferring him to a proper gurney and beginning assessment. Bishop took a moment to catch his breath, suddenly aware of his soaked clothing and the exhaustion in his muscles. "You went back," Bennett observed, handing him a bottle of water. "Both of you." Winters nodded, equally exhausted. Couldn't leave him behind. Before they could say more, a distant but powerful sound reached them. The unmistakable collapse of a major structural element. Through the terminal windows, they could see a section of the hotel's north wing visibly sinking as water poured through newly opened gaps in the wall. Just in time, Bishop observed quietly, as medical personnel tended to Jenkins and evacuation coordinators confirmed all guests were accounted for. Bishop became aware of Gregory Winters watching him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Not the competitive evaluation of yesterday's conference, but something more reflective. "You didn't hesitate," Winters said finally. "When that security officer said someone was trapped, you immediately turned back." Bishop met his gaze evenly. "Neither did you." Winters acknowledged this with a slight nod. "I've been watching you since the crisis began, moving between roles, applying whatever expertise the moment demanded. It's not what I expected." "Based on our interaction at the conference?" Bishop asked. "Based on my own limited understanding," Winters corrected, surprising Bishop with his candor. "I've spent 20 years in an industry that values specialized expertise within narrowly defined domains. Your approach challenges that entire framework." Before Bishop could respond, Elena approached with urgent news. "The National Guard has established helicopter landing zones on the terminal roof. They're beginning medical evacuations for critical cases." As Bishop moved to help coordinate the medical priorities he carried with him, the awareness that something fundamental had shifted, not just in Winters' perception, but in the broader understanding of capability and leadership among all who had witnessed the events of this extraordinary day. The crisis continued unfolding, but its catalytic effect had already revealed truths that would remain long after the floodwaters receded. The terminal's emergency operations center hummed with tense activity. Airport officials, National Guard officers, and emergency management personnel clustered around weather displays showing the massive storm system stalled over Indianapolis. Bishop had been summoned from the medical station after finishing his immediate patient care duties, though he remained on call for any critical cases. "The situation is deteriorating faster than anticipated," the emergency management coordinator explained to the assembled group. "Several neighborhoods north of the airport are now experiencing structural flooding. The governor has expanded the disaster declaration to encompass 5 counties. A National Guard colonel added, "We're consolidating evacuation centers, but transportation options are severely limited. Our helicopter operations are restricted by the weather conditions." Bishop listened attentively, his mind calculating medical resource needs against the expanding crisis. Elena stood beside him, quietly documenting key points on her tablet. To their surprise, Gregory Winters had also been included in the briefing, his business leadership experience apparently deemed valuable by the coordination team. "What about the airport's structural integrity?" someone asked. The airport operations director pointed to an engineering schematic. The main terminal was designed to withstand significant flooding, but we're approaching unprecedented water levels. Our primary concern is power infrastructure. If the main electrical vaults flood, even the backup generators won't help us. As the briefing continued, a communications officer approached urgently. "Sir, we have a situation developing with Meridian Flight 884. All eyes turned to the young officer who continued. They were inbound to Chicago, diverted to Louisville due to the weather, but now Louisville has lost runway lighting due to power failures. They're requesting emergency landing clearance here despite our closure status." The airport director frowned. "That's not possible. We have standing water on all runways, and our instrument landing systems are operating on emergency power only." "They're declaring fuel emergency, sir," the officer added. Approximately 45 minutes of flight time remaining. Sophia Bennett, who had joined the briefing minutes earlier, stepped forward. "Flight 884 is one of our regional jets, 78 passengers, 4 crew." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. An aircraft with limited fuel, no viable alternates, and deteriorating conditions at Indianapolis, the only airport potentially capable of receiving them. Captain Rivera, who had been consulting on aviation matters throughout the crisis, spoke up. "What's their current position?" "Holding at 18,000 feet, approximately 100 miles southwest," the communications officer replied. Bishop noticed several glances in his direction. His earlier assistance with First Officer Walsh's landing had clearly made an impression. The airport director turned to Rivera. "Captain, your assessment?" Rivera considered for a moment. "Runway 523 is our best option. It's at the highest elevation point on the field, and the wind direction would allow a direct approach. But conditions are marginal at best, and we have limited emergency response capability if something goes wrong." "Do we have qualified controllers available?" the director asked. "Skeleton crew operating on emergency protocols," came the reply. "But they're experienced." The director rubbed his forehead, the weight of the decision evident in his expression. "If we attempt this and it goes wrong. If we don't attempt it, we're condemning that aircraft to a fuel exhaustion scenario," Rivera countered. "That's not an option." After a tense moment, the director nodded. "Begin preparations for emergency landing operations on runway 523. Full emergency response positioning. I want runway assessment teams out there immediately to check for standing water and debris." As the room erupted into coordinated activity, Rivera approached Bishop. "I hate to ask this, but given your assistance earlier—" "What do you need?" Bishop replied without hesitation. "This landing will be significantly more challenging than Walsh's approach," Rivera explained. "We have worse conditions, limited runway lighting, and potentially standing water. The captain is experienced, but he'll need every advantage we can provide. I'm available if they want my input," Bishop confirmed. Rivera nodded gratefully. "Let's move to the tower. That's where we'll have the best communications and situational awareness." Bishop turned to Elena. "I'll be in the tower. Can you continue coordinating the medical response preparation? We may need trauma resources standing by." "Of course," she replied. "I've already started inventory of available supplies." As Bishop prepared to leave with Rivera, Winters approached unexpectedly. "Bishop." He hesitated, then asked with surprising directness, "Is there anything I can do to help?" The offer caught Bishop off guard. 24 hours ago, this man had publicly questioned his credentials. Now, he was volunteering assistance in a life-threatening crisis. "Help Elena coordinate the emergency medical preparations," Bishop decided. "Your organizational experience could be valuable." Winters nodded, accepting the assignment without his usual corporate posturing. "Good luck in the tower." This simple expression of support, free from competitive undertones, marked a significant shift in their interaction. Bishop acknowledged it with a brief nod before following Rivera toward the airport operations center. Their path took them through flooded service corridors where National Guard members had created improvised walkways using luggage conveyor sections. The physical infrastructure of the massive airport complex showed increasing signs of strain. Water seeping through seams in the walls, electrical systems protected by hastily applied plastic sheeting, emergency lighting casting stark shadows. They reached the elevator bank that would take them to the tower, finding it guarded by security personnel who checked their credentials before allowing them to proceed. Inside the elevator, Rivera briefed Bishop on what to expect. Tower operations are running on emergency power. They've consolidated all functions to the top level: approach control ground tower and emergency coordination. It's going to be crowded and tense. Bishop nodded, understanding. Similar to a forward operating base during combat operations. Compressed command structure, simplified communications. Rivera glanced at him with renewed appreciation. Exactly. Your military background really is proving invaluable. The elevator opened directly into the tower operations room, a circular space with windows providing a 360-degree view of the airport complex and surrounding area. Even in the darkness, the scale of the flooding was apparent. Water covered vast sections of the airfield, reflecting the emergency lights and occasional lightning. Only the highest parts of the runways remained visible above the encroaching water. Inside, a reduced team of air traffic controllers manned essential stations. Their faces showed the strain of extended crisis operations, but their voices remained professionally calm as they communicated with aircraft and emergency vehicles. The tower supervisor, a gray-haired man with the focused intensity of decades in air traffic control, acknowledged their arrival with a brief nod. Captain Rivera, and you must be Dr. Bishop. Your reputation precedes you. Kevin Blackwood, Tower Supervisor. Rivera made the introduction. He's coordinating the emergency landing operation. What's the current status? Bishop asked, immediately focusing on the operational details. Blackwood gestured to a weather display. Storm intensity increasing again. Wind, 050 at 32 knots gusting to 48. Visibility, 3/4 of a mile in heavy precipitation. Runway 5 to 23 has been checked and cleared. Some standing water, but less than the other runways. Emergency response vehicles are positioning, and Flight 884 currently at flight level 180, holding pattern 90 miles southwest. Captain is Robert Anderson, 23 years with Meridian, over 15,000 hours total time. First Officer Jamil Patel, 7 years experience. Bishop absorbed this information quickly. Experienced crew. That's good. What aircraft type? Embraer E190 Rivera supplied. Regional jet, modern avionics, excellent handling characteristics. But it's lighter than the 737 from earlier, which means greater susceptibility to crosswinds and wind shear. A controller raised his hand. Flight 884 is calling. They're requesting landing clearance and approach instructions. Blackwood nodded to Rivera and Bishop. You two ready to assist if needed? Yes, they replied simultaneously. The controller activated the speaker system so everyone in the tower could hear the exchange. Meridian 884, Indianapolis Tower. We are preparing runway 5 for your emergency landing. Be advised, conditions are marginal. Wind 050 at 32, gusting to 48, visibility 3/4 mile, moderate to severe precipitation. The captain's voice came through clearly, despite the static. Indianapolis Tower, Meridian 884. Understood. We're showing fuel for approximately 35 minutes of flight time remaining. Request immediate approach clearance. Meridian 884 cleared to descend to 10,000 feet. Expect ILS approach to runway 5. Be advised, runway lighting is operating on emergency power and may be intermittent. Roger, descending to 10,000. Request current field conditions. Blackwood stepped closer to the microphone. Meridian 884. This is Tower Supervisor Blackwood. We have standing water reported at various points on the runway. Maximum depth approximately 2 inches near the touchdown zone. Emergency equipment in position. We also have aviation advisors standing by, including Captain Rivera from Meridian and Dr. Bishop, who assisted with the previous emergency landing. There was a brief pause before the captain responded. Copy that, Tower. Appreciate all resources. Beginning descent now. For the next several minutes, the tower team worked with focused intensity as Flight 884 began its approach. Bishop stood near the radar display watching the aircraft's progress while listening to the communications. His military training gave him a different perspective on the developing situation, identifying potential problems before they became critical. They're going to encounter significant wind shear at about 3,000 feet, he observed to Rivera, based on the weather pattern and terrain features. Rivera nodded agreement. Should we advise? Let's wait until they're closer. Too much information too early can be distracting. The aircraft continued its descent with the flight crew providing regular updates on their position and status. Bishop noted the calm professionalism in Captain Anderson's voice, the mark of an experienced pilot who had likely weathered difficult situations before. As Flight 884 approached the 5,000-foot level, Bishop noticed a concerning pattern developing on the weather radar. There's a microburst forming directly in their approach path, he pointed out. Potentially severe downdraft. Blackwood immediately keyed the microphone. Meridian 884 Tower. Weather radar is showing potential microburst activity at your 2 o'clock position, approximately 5 miles from the field. Suggest immediate course correction to heading 030. Roger Tower. Turning to heading 030. Anderson confirmed. The tension in the tower increased as everyone watched the radar display tracking the aircraft's path relative to the dangerous weather cell. Bishop maintained his outward calm, but internally calculated contingency options should the situation deteriorate. They're clear of the immediate danger, Rivera observed after a tense minute. But the approach path is now significantly offset from runway alignment. Bishop studied the displays. They'll need to execute an offset approach with final alignment inside 2 miles, challenging in these conditions. Blackwood looked to Bishop. Doctor, given your experience with these conditions, do you have specific recommendations for the flight crew? Bishop considered carefully before responding. Yes. They should maintain a higher than normal approach speed, approximately VREF plus 15, to compensate for the gusting conditions. Begin alignment correction no later than 2 miles final using a modified side slip rather than a standard correction to maintain better control authority. Blackwood nodded and relayed the recommendations. Captain Anderson acknowledged good advice, Tower. We'll implement accordingly. The aircraft continued its approach, now visible on the airport surveillance camera feeds displayed on monitors in the tower. Through the rain-streaked images, they could see the landing lights of Flight 884 appearing intermittently through the low clouds and precipitation. Passing 2,000 feet, Anderson reported. Runway in sight intermittently, continuing approach. Suddenly, the aircraft on the monitor yawed sharply left, evidence of a significant wind gust hitting it from the side. Wind shear. Wind shear. The first officer's voice came through the speakers, the stress evident despite his professional training. Bishop leaned forward. Suggest full power. Maintain current pitch attitude, allow the aircraft to weather vane into the wind before re-establishing runway alignment. Blackwood relayed the guidance immediately. On the monitor, they could see the aircraft respond, its landing lights stabilizing as the pilots followed the suggestion. Good recovery, Anderson radioed. Continuing approach, 1,000 feet. The next few minutes proceeded with tense focus as the aircraft made its final approach. Bishop observed the technique with a professional eye, noting the excellent crew coordination despite the challenging conditions. 500 feet, Anderson reported. Runway in sight. Continuing, but at approximately 300 feet above the runway disaster nearly struck. The aircraft suddenly dropped rapidly, a classic sign of encountering a microburst downdraft. Go around. Go around. Bishop called out instinctively, his fighter pilot training recognizing the danger instantly. Blackwood immediately transmitted Meridian 884, go around microburst on final approach. On the monitor, they watched as the aircraft's nose pitched up and the landing lights began climbing away from the runway. the pilots executing the missed approach procedure with textbook precision. Executing go-around. Anderson confirmed, his voice steady despite the near miss. Climbing to 3,000 feet. The tower team exchanged tense glances. A go-around was the correct decision, but it further reduced the aircraft's already limited fuel reserves. Fuel status. Blackwood inquired after the aircraft had stabilized at the higher altitude. Approximately 25 minutes remaining, Anderson replied. Request immediate vectors for another approach. Bishop studied the weather displays intently. The microburst appears to be moving east of the field. Suggest approach to runway 32 instead. It provides a better wind angle and avoids the worst of the weather cell. Rivera nodded agreement. Runway 32 would give them a more direct approach path. Less time in the air means conserving fuel. Blackwood made the decision quickly. Meridian 884, we're changing to runway 32 for your next approach. Turn left heading 290, descend and maintain 2,000 feet. Roger, turning left heading 290, descending to 2,000. Anderson confirmed. Bishop moved to a different window, studying the visible conditions around runway 32. The precipitation remained heavy, but the runway itself appeared clearer than 523 had been. Dr. Bishop Blackwood called. Captain Anderson is requesting to speak with you directly. Bishop took the offered headset. Captain Anderson, this is Dr. Bishop. Doctor, I understand you helped talk down another Meridian flight earlier today? Anderson's voice came through clearly. That's correct. Different circumstances, but similar challenges. I've got a situation developing beyond the weather. Anderson explained, his voice deliberately measured. First Officer Patel is experiencing severe vertigo from the turbulence and limited visual references. I'm essentially flying single pilot at this point. The situation had just escalated significantly. Without a functional co-pilot, Captain Anderson would be handling all flight controls, communications, and systems management during an already challenging approach. That's a critical development, Bishop acknowledged. Is Patel able to manage communications? At minimum, barely. He's fighting nausea and disorientation. I'm effectively alone up here. Bishop exchanged a concerned glance with Rivera before continuing. All right, Captain. Here's what we're going to do. I want you to simplify your cockpit workload as much as possible. Put everything non-essential on autopilot. Focus only on the critical flight parameters. Already done. Good. For the approach, I recommend using the autopilot until 500 feet if conditions allow. Configure early. Gear down approach flaps now rather than incrementally. One less thing to manage during final approach. Copy that. Already configuring. Bishop continued drawing on his military experience with emergency approaches. When you transition to manual control, focus exclusively on pitch and power. Runway 32 gives you a more favorable wind angle, but you'll still have gusts from your right. Let the aircraft weather vane slightly into the wind. And the standing water on the runway, Anderson asked. Based on the runway survey, it's minimal on 32, less than an inch at touchdown point. Plan for a firm positive touchdown rather than floating. You want good contact with the runway to prevent hydroplaning. There was a brief pause, then Anderson's voice again. Dr. Bishop. Your advice is exactly what I would get from our chief pilot. You've clearly sat in this seat before. F-16s primarily, but yes, about 2,000 hours total time before I transitioned to medicine. Lucky for us, you decided to get diverted to Indianapolis today, Anderson replied. Beginning approach now. For the next several minutes, the tower team watched intently as Flight 884 executed its approach to runway 32. Bishop maintained a calm, steady stream of advice, providing key observations about wind conditions and runway state as the aircraft descended. 1,000 feet, Anderson reported. Runway in sight. Looking good, Bishop confirmed. Wind appears steady from the right at about 30 knots. Maintain your crab angle until flare. The aircraft continued its descent more stable than the previous approach as it benefited from the more favorable wind angle and Anderson's precise control despite his increased workload. 500 feet came the update. Disengaging autopilot. Transition looks good, Bishop observed as the aircraft maintained its stable approach path under manual control. Runway clear ahead. 300 feet. 200 feet. Everyone in the tower held their breath as the aircraft descended through the final critical phase of the approach. Outside, lightning illuminated the scene briefly, revealing the Embraer regional jet now clearly visible on its approach path, emergency vehicles positioned along the runway with lights flashing. 100 feet. Bishop's eyes remained fixed on the aircraft, his fighter pilot instincts assessing every aspect of the approach. It looked good, stable, well-controlled on speed and profile. Then suddenly the entire airfield went dark as the emergency power system failed momentarily. The runway lights, taxiway markings, and approach indicators all extinguished simultaneously. Power failure. Power failure. Blackwood called urgently. Meridian 884. Be advised we have lost runway lighting. For 3 eternal seconds, the darkness was complete except for the aircraft's landing lights illuminating the runway ahead of it. Then the emergency generators kicked in, restoring partial power. But the runway lighting remained offline. Continuing approach. Anderson reported, his voice remarkably steady despite the new complication. Runway still visible with aircraft lights. Bishop held his breath as the aircraft crossed the threshold, now mere feet above the darkened runway. Anderson executed a textbook touchdown, firm but controlled precisely on the center line, despite having only his aircraft's lights to guide him. Meridian 884 is on the ground. Anderson reported, the relief evident in his voice despite his professional demeanor. Rolling out on runway 32. A spontaneous cheer erupted in the tower as everyone watched the aircraft slow and eventually turn onto a taxiway guided by emergency vehicles whose flashing lights provided navigation references in the continuing darkness. Outstanding landing, Captain Blackwood transmitted. Emergency vehicles will escort you to Terminal C Gate 5. Medical personnel standing by to assess First Officer Patel. Copy that, tower. And please convey my thanks to Dr. Bishop. His advice was instrumental in our successful approach. Bishop accepted the acknowledgments with a simple nod, though he felt the profound relief shared by everyone in the tower. 78 passengers and 4 crew members were safely on the ground despite conditions that would have defeated less skilled pilots. As the initial celebration subsided, Blackwood approached Bishop directly. Doctor, in 25 years of air traffic control, I've never seen anything quite like what we just witnessed. Your combination of aviation and medical expertise literally saved lives today. Captain Anderson deserves the credit, Bishop replied. He executed a perfect approach and landing under nearly impossible conditions. With your guidance, Rivera added. Don't diminish your contribution, Doctor. As Bishop turned to leave, he found a surprising figure waiting near the elevator. Gregory Winters, still in the rumpled business attire he'd worn since the crisis began. I came up when I heard about the power failure. Winters explained, his expression unusually subdued. Thought there might be something I could do to help. Bishop studied him with new interest. This was a different Winters than the polished corporate executive who had questioned his credentials at the conference. There was a humility in his demeanor that hadn't been present before. Everything worked out, Bishop assured him. Captain Anderson managed a perfect landing despite the challenges. So I heard Winters replied. As they entered the elevator together, he added, Your medical team is ready for the arriving passengers. Elena has been remarkable, organized everything with military precision. The comment about Elena carried no hint of the condescension that might have colored it 24 hours earlier. It was a simple acknowledgement of capability regardless of title or background. Medical concerns, Bishop asked as they descended. First officer apparently has severe vertigo. A few passengers reporting anxiety attacks, nothing critical so far. Bishop nodded, mentally preparing to shift back into physician mode as they reached the terminal level. Bishop Winters said abruptly as the elevator neared its destination, "I need to say something." Bishop turned to him, curious. "What I've witnessed today, your seamless transition between aviation guidance, emergency medicine, and crisis leadership." Winters paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It's fundamentally challenged my understanding of expertise and capability." Before Bishop could respond, the elevator doors opened to reveal Elena waiting for them, tablet in hand. "Alexander, the first passengers are being processed now. Medical team is ready for the first officer." Bishop nodded, stepping out of the elevator. "I'll head there directly." As he moved toward the medical station, he was aware of Winters following, still processing the transformation that had occurred in their dynamic. What had begun as professional antagonism had evolved into something more complex, a recognition that transcended corporate positioning. The crisis continued unfolding, but its catalyst effect had already revealed truths that would remain long after the floodwaters receded. And for Gregory Winters, that revelation appeared to be just beginning. If you've ever witnessed someone rise to meet an extraordinary challenge with unexpected skills, share your experience in the comments. These moments of human capability inspire us all. 3 weeks after the Indianapolis flooding, the Medical Technology Conference Room at Chicago's Lakefront Convention Center buzzed with anticipation. Industry leaders, research scientists, and investment analysts filled every seat, with additional attendees standing along the walls. The session title displayed on screens throughout the room: Integrated Expertise, a New Paradigm for Medical Innovation. On stage, Thomas Kelly moderated a panel featuring Alexander Bishop, Sophia Bennett, and, most surprisingly to industry insiders, Gregory Winters. Their joint appearance represented a seismic shift in the competitive landscape, particularly given Winters' public challenge to Bishop's credentials just a month earlier. "Before we open to audience questions," Kelly said, addressing the capacity crowd, "I'd like each panelist to reflect on how recent events have transformed their approach to leadership and innovation." He turned first to Winters, whose corporate polish remained intact, though his demeanor carried a new thoughtfulness. "Gregory, perhaps you could begin given your recent announcement of NeuroSync's strategic alliance with Mindframe." Winters nodded, adjusting his microphone. "What we experienced in Indianapolis fundamentally challenged my understanding of organizational excellence." He began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone sharing hard-won insight. "For decades, I operated from a paradigm that prioritized hierarchy, specialized domains, and clear competitive boundaries. That approach built NeuroSync into an industry leader, but it also created blind spots, particularly regarding the value of integrated expertise and collaborative innovation." He glanced toward Bishop. Witnessing Dr. Bishop seamlessly transition between aviation guidance, medical intervention, and crisis leadership forced me to reconsider those assumptions. His effectiveness didn't come from compartmentalized excellence, but from the connections he established between diverse domains. The audience listened attentively as Winters continued, many taking notes on this unexpected philosophical shift from an executive previously known for aggressive competitive positioning. "Our alliance with Mindframe represents more than a business arrangement," he explained. "It's an acknowledgement that the most significant medical breakthroughs will likely emerge at the intersections between traditionally separate disciplines. By combining our distribution infrastructure with their innovative approach to neural regeneration, we create possibilities neither organization could achieve independently." Kelly turned next to Bennett. "Sophia, as CEO of Meridian Airlines, you're implementing similar principles in an entirely different industry. Could you elaborate?" Bennett nodded, her copper hair catching the stage lights as she leaned forward. "Aviation has traditionally operated in rigidly defined specialties: pilots, engineers, operations, safety. Each domain maintains clear boundaries, with expertise developing in vertical silos rather than horizontal integration." She gestured toward the audience. That approach served the industry well for decades, but what we witnessed during the Indianapolis crisis revealed its limitations. When conventional boundaries dissolved under pressure, extraordinary capabilities emerged, not just from individuals like Dr. Bishop, but from ordinary people who discovered cross-functional insights when artificial constraints were removed. The observation resonated with many attendees who had followed the Indianapolis story through media coverage and subsequent analysis. At Meridian, Bennett continued, "We're implementing what we call boundary transcendence training, deliberately exposing our specialists to adjacent domains. Pilots learning engineering principles, operations, personnel, understanding flight dynamics, maintenance, teams, studying customer psychology. The early results have been remarkable, with innovation emerging precisely at those intersection points." Finally, Kelly turned to Bishop. "Dr. Bishop, your experience bridging military aviation neurosurgery and corporate leadership provided the catalyst for much of this discussion. How do you view these developments?" Bishop considered the question thoughtfully before responding. Throughout the increased attention following Indianapolis, he had maintained his characteristic balance of engaged presence and personal modesty. What happened in Indianapolis wasn't about individual capability. He began his deep voice carrying easily through the room. It was about the natural integration of diverse experiences when artificial separations are removed. He gestured toward his fellow panelists. "The transformations Mr. Winters and Ms. Bennett described reflect a broader recognition that human potential is most fully expressed when we stop fragmenting knowledge into isolated domains. The brain itself doesn't segregate information into departmental silos. It creates meaning through connections." The audience leaned forward, many nodding agreement as Bishop continued. "At Mindframe, our neural interface technology works precisely because we integrated principles from multiple disciplines: neurosurgery, biomedical engineering, cognitive psychology, materials science. No single specialty could have developed this approach independently." Bishop's gaze swept across the room. "The same principle applies to our organizations and leadership structures. When we remove artificial boundaries between domains of knowledge, we don't just add capabilities together, we create emergent properties that transcend the sum of their parts." The philosophical depth of his observation sparked appreciative murmurs throughout the audience. This wasn't the typical corporate presentation of quarterly results or product roadmaps, but a fundamental reassessment of how knowledge and expertise function most effectively. During the subsequent question period, a medical journal editor raised her hand. "Dr. Bishop, this integrated approach clearly proved valuable during crisis conditions, but how do you maintain it during normal operations when traditional structures and hierarchies reassert themselves?" It was a perceptive question that addressed the challenge of sustaining transformation beyond the catalyzing crisis. "Integration requires deliberate practice," Bishop replied. "At Mindframe, we've implemented several structural approaches, rotating researchers between specialties, including diverse expertise in every decision process, evaluating ideas based on integrative potential rather than departmental origin." He leaned forward slightly. "But perhaps most importantly, we've redefined what we consider normal operations. Crisis conditions don't just arise during floods or power failures. They exist whenever human potential is suppressed by artificial constraints. Recognizing that daily reality helps maintain the integrative mindset even when external urgency diminishes." The insight resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had experienced the limitations of rigid organizational structures in their own institutions. As the panel concluded to enthusiastic applause, attendees gathered in animated discussion groups, energized by the transformative possibilities presented. The conversation had transcended typical industry discussions of market share and quarterly projections to address fundamental questions about human capability and organizational design. In the reception that followed, Bishop found himself approached by a distinguished neurosurgeon from Mayo Clinic, Dr. Elaine Crawford. "That was extraordinary, Alexander," she greeted him, particularly coming from three leaders previously known for their competitive positioning. What catalyzed this transformation beyond the immediate crisis experience? Bishop considered her question carefully. "I believe each of us recognized something similar in Indianapolis, that our traditional frameworks for understanding, expertise, and leadership were insufficient for addressing complex challenges. When those frameworks failed under pressure, we glimpsed what becomes possible when artificial boundaries dissolve." Crawford nodded thoughtfully. The medical profession has long struggled with this tension, specialized knowledge becoming increasingly narrow, while complex health challenges demand integrative understanding. Your neural interface technology represents exactly the kind of boundary-crossing innovation we need. Their conversation was interrupted by Elena's arrival. "Dr. Bishop Walter Jenkins is here with a group of educators from his mentoring program. They've implemented some of the principles you discussed and wanted to share their initial results." This unexpected connection illustrated how the transformation continued rippling outward. Jenkins had translated his observations from the Indianapolis crisis into educational leadership principles, adapting Bishop's integrative approach for a completely different domain. Across the reception hall, Gregory Winters was engaged in earnest conversation with research scientists from several university medical centers. His gestures conveyed genuine enthusiasm rather than the calculated positioning that had previously characterized his professional interactions. Nearby, Sophia Bennett spoke with aviation medicine specialists exploring applications for Mindframe's neural recovery technology to pilot rehabilitation programs. The partnership she had proposed was advancing rapidly with clinical protocols, already under development. Later that evening, Bishop joined Elena Kelly Bennett and Winters for dinner at a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. The setting sun cast golden light across the water, creating a fitting backdrop for their reflection on the day's events. "I've been in medical investing for 35 years, Kelly observed, raising his glass. "What's emerging from your collective transformation represents the most significant paradigm shift I've witnessed. Not just in technology application, but in fundamental understanding of how expertise functions most effectively." Winters, whose competitive edge had softened into something more collaborative, nodded agreement. "A month ago, I would have dismissed this conversation as idealistic abstraction. Now I recognize it as perhaps the most practical business strategy available to us. The challenge," Bennett added, "will be sustaining this integrative approach as we move further from the catalyzing crisis." Institutional inertia naturally pulls organizations back toward specialized silos and hierarchical structures. Bishop considered this thoughtfully, which is why we need to anchor the transformation in structural changes rather than just philosophical agreement. At Mindframe, we're redesigning our research teams, evaluation metrics, and decision processes to maintain integration as our operational foundation. Elena, whose organizational expertise had been instrumental in implementing these changes, added her perspective. "We're already seeing the benefits. Our neural tissue regeneration approach has advanced significantly faster by integrating previously separate research streams." As their dinner continued, the conversation flowed naturally between professional developments and personal reflections. The shared experience in Indianapolis had created connections that transcended typical corporate relationships, establishing a foundation of mutual respect and genuine collaboration. When Bishop returned to his apartment later that evening, he found a package delivered from Indianapolis. Opening it revealed a framed photograph, the airport terminal during the flooding crisis, showing Bishop moving between medical care and evacuation coordination with focused purpose. The accompanying note read, "Some moments reveal our truest capabilities. Thank you for showing what becomes possible when artificial boundaries dissolve. Lucia Ramirez." Bishop placed the photograph on his desk beside the framed image of himself as a young Air Force pilot. The visual juxtaposition represented not separate chapters of his life, but a continuous journey of integrating diverse experiences into a coherent whole. Outside his window, Chicago's skyline glittered against the night sky, a complex system of interconnected components functioning together, much like the integrated expertise that had emerged as a new paradigm from the crucible of crisis. The transformation continued unfolding not just within organizations and leadership structures, but in the fundamental understanding of human capability and connection. And its ripple effects were only beginning to reveal their full potential. This powerful story highlights the incredible potential that lies within each of us when artificial boundaries between our skills are removed. We've seen how Dr. Bishop's journey from fighter pilot to neurosurgeon to CEO created an integrated expertise that saved lives during a crisis, and how that example transformed those around him. If you've been inspired by this message of breaking down artificial limits and bringing your whole self to every challenge, please hit that like button to help share this story with others who need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more transformative stories that challenge conventional thinking, and leave a comment about a time when you or someone you know demonstrated unexpected capabilities in a moment of need. Remember, your unique combination of experiences and skills isn't a liability. It's your greatest strength. The world needs more integrated thinkers who can see connections others miss. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their full potential today.